The Historian. The Goblin Archives, Book 2. By Sierra Graves. Chapter 1. Nienna. Goblins swarmed me, and I raised my sword, striking out at anything that came too close. There were too many. We weren't going to make it. I spotted Alred through the mass of bodies, but no other elves caught my eye. We were the only ones left on the battlefield. He cut a bloody path to me, and we pressed our backs to each other. Alred threw a look over his shoulder, the gold flecks in his eyes flaring to life with fury and regret. There was no more time for words. Goblin surged forward. The trees burned as the fire spread, consuming everything in its path. Flames tore across the field and straight for us. Alred grabbed hold of my free hand, squeezing it tightly as we faced our end together. Just as the flames reached out to swallow us, I screamed. My eyes shot open, and I wildly glanced around the room. I sank to the bed in a heap, panting for air. I was safe, back in Velbam. There was no fire and no great battle with the goblins, not yet at least. I was safe, and so was Alred. We were alive. We still had time. Cold sweat covered my forehead, and annoyed I wiped it away with my hand. It had been nearly 5 weeks since Phil went back home, and was made to forget about me. I missed him, Alice, and Mom, but there was no going back. The call to being the historian was in full swing, including never-ending training with Alred, Jurgis, and Thalia. I glanced out the window, and found the suns weren't even peeking over the horizon yet. Leaves fluttered past my window in the crisp morning air, and I shivered, pulling the quilts up higher around my shoulders. Thalia had told me the seasons were changing quickly. She hadn't been kidding. A few days ago, it had been hot. Now the leaves rapidly faded from yellows and greens to oranges and reds, and the nights were cold, leaving behind a thin layer of frost. The sight of the landscape turning from summer to fall was breathtaking. I'd grown used to it, and felt more at home with it each passing day. It probably helped I was in Dad's old rooms. Garrick Havard, my father, the last historian and the man I grew up hearing about as a character in fairy tales told by Mom. A huge part of me doubted I'd be able to live up to his reputation. Something Alred continued to lecture me on. To stop doubting myself. Some days that elf knew how to push my buttons. The last images of the nightmare came back to me while I pictured Alred's face. I stilled. That fire in that vision wasn't normal. It couldn't be. The flames moved as if they were alive. I overheard the 7, Alred and the generals discussing what the goblins had been up to the last few months, and their fear at what dark magic they were willing to unleash. That fire, it had to be part of their plans. But the vision still felt so far away, and it wasn't the only one I'd had. There had been one nearly every day, but all of them took place in the distant future. I hadn't told Alred, but sometimes the images were fuzzy, like the scenes played out through a fog. They'd shift and change midway through, and I was left confused and out of sorts. Other times they were real, far too real, and I'd come out of the vision expecting to be dead. I climbed out of bed, shivering when my bare feet hit the cold stone floor of my room. The long sweater-like robe I was given, as part of a new wardrobe, hung on the back of the wooden chair at the desk. I slipped into it quickly, tugging it around me, and rushed to find my slippers. My morning routine had gone from climbing out of bed, grabbing coffee, my books for class, and heading out the door, to stoking a fire in the hearth and dressing in clothes I never imagined I'd wear. At least there's indoor plumbing, I mused to myself with a laugh after I'd taken care of business. I was getting better at building my own fires too, mostly because I grew tired of having random elves show up in my room to do it for me. They'd appear without my even asking for help. It was one of the few small things I was proud of. The other was that I managed to set up Alred on 3 random dates since I made my plan to ensure he found a way to be happy. The latest one had been last night. According to Jurgis, Celica, a healer, had her eyes set on Alred for years, but he never noticed. I'd met her a few times, seeing as she lived in Velbam and studied in the central tower with Jurgis. She seemed friendly enough and pleasant to be around. So, last night when Alred headed to the tavern, I made sure to let Celica know he would be there, and that he would love it if she would offer to buy him a drink, maybe dance for a bit. Jurgis was the only other elf wise to my plan, and he thought it was great. I brushed out my hair, hoping that maybe Celica would finally be the one to make that damn protector of mine smile. My hands stilled, and I glanced at my reflection. A white-hot spike of jealousy I hadn't expected shot through me. You're not jealous. You can't be. You're doing this for him. He said you couldn't be together, and you don't want to be anyway, because that freaking tome over there is going to kill you. Stick to the plan. Besides, not like he's tried to kiss you since that night. The 5 weeks had been long, and each day, I'd waited to see if he would say anything about the heated moment we'd shared in my room. After the first 3 weeks, I stopped waiting and decided it was time to put my plan into action, and find him someone to care for that wasn't me. I swallowed back my longing for a relationship with Alred, that wasn't simply one between the historian and protector. Forgetting how he held me and kissed me hadn't been easy. If I wasn't having nightmares about that terrible vision, I dreamt about his holding me. With my hair drawn back in a tight braid, so it was out of the way for training, I dressed in my usual pants, blouse, and a leather corset. Once I tugged my boots on, I ran my fingers over the cover of the tome. So far I'd recorded nearly 30 visions, but each of them had been far different than what I'd read in the tomes of the past historians. What they had seen had come to pass within the next few days, sometimes hours. But what I witnessed, the atrocities and slaughter I'd been forced to see, felt so far away. Dad had told me each historian was shown things differently, but somehow I knew everything I'd been shown so far had nothing to do with the coming days or weeks. My visions were further out. No matter what Thalia or Alred or anyone else told me, the foreboding growing in the pit of stomach said this was a sign. A bad one. I'd overheard Alred telling Trollian the tides of war were changing. I couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't turning in the elves' favor. The hall was empty, save for a few of the staff setting out breakfast. I helped myself to fresh coffee. 4 guards stood at their posts, unmoving, as they were every morning, afternoon, and night. I'd asked Jurgis one day if they really needed that many guards. A sad look had come over his face, and he told me the generals feared the goblins were going to start trying to assassinate the 7. There had been 2 attempts, but thanks to the increased numbers of soldiers in Velbam, they didn't get beyond the garden gate. Their presence should have made me feel safe instead of uneasy, but they were a reminder of the war Kenzugrot had been in for centuries. And now all that pressure was on me, to ensure it came to an end, preferably one where the elves weren't wiped out of existence. Steam rose from the mug, warming my face. The heated ceramic chased away the chill from my hands, and my mind drifted to my nightmare. No, not a nightmare. A vision of an event that would come to pass. Just like all the others I'd had. The dull echo of screaming sounded in my ears. My eyes went in and out of focus. They were dying, all those people in my visions, they were dying, and I wasn't strong enough to save them. Their shouts competed with the howling goblins, and the crackling of that fire, eating everything in its path. I tilted my head, thinking back over every vision I'd had. It wasn't only the battlefield I had seen those hungry flames rampaging through. How the hell had I missed it? Nienna. The voice whispered in my mind. I stilled. I'd heard it before, I knew I had, but where? Soon, Nienna, very soon. I have great plans for you. Nienna. I yelped. The mug slipped from my fingers, crashed to the table, and shattered. Damn it, I muttered, grabbing a napkin to mop up the spilled coffee. Alred frowned, helping me pick up the broken mug. Thanks for scaring me. Wasn't my intention, he replied. What do I always tell you? I glanced around, searching for who else might have said my name. Shit, if I was going to start hearing voices, my life was about to become far more complicated. I was merely tired, I told myself, that's all, tired and hearing things. Can we not start with the lessons this early? The sun's barely up. And why are you even awake? He shrugged as he poured us more coffee, and sat on the other side of the table. I was awake, figured I might as well get up. The gold in his eyes glimmered, and the way his jaw tensed said that was a lie. The dark circles around his eyes mirrored my own most days. He might have been awake, but something jarred him from his obviously not so restful sleep. Meaning me and my nightmares. I was starting to hate this connection we had with each other. Or he had to me. It wasn't fair that any time I was afraid, or about to have a mental breakdown, he sensed it and came running. How was I supposed to find him a pretty elf to have a life with if he was tied to me so closely? Yeah, sure you were, I finally murmured. Why are you up? You loathe mornings. I returned his shrug with one of my own. Was just up. So how was last night? Last night? Yeah. Jurgis said something about you and Trollian going to the tavern. I don't know. I was curious if anything fun happened. You're acting weird, he said, and my brow arched. Weirder than normal. What? I can't ask you how your night was. You can if you tell me why you're awake. I squeezed my mug, thankful when more people meandered into the hall as the central tower, what the elves called it, came to life. Lying never worked with him, and I was too exhausted to come up with one anyway. Bad dream, I confessed. Same one or different? Do you really have to ask? He sighed, setting his coffee down. It's merely a nightmare, he insisted. I think if you focus on something else aside from that vision, you'll stop seeing it every time you close your eyes. Right, and what would you like me to focus on instead? I shot back. The other visions, where I see everyone being torn to pieces. I whispered harshly, not wanting the others to overhear me. Or where I see fire destroying villages, while the goblins dance over the bodies of the dead. Tell me, Alred, what would you like me to focus on? He opened his mouth. I raised my finger, pointing at him. And so help me if you say my training, I'm going to toss this scalding hot coffee in your face. His mouth clamped shut but his lips twitched. Nice to see you have Garrick's temper. You never said anything about Garrick having anger issues. Alred shifted on the wooden bench, avoiding my glance. No, I didn't. Why? I just didn't. Your temper's like his, though. He'd explode like a volcano when pushed too far. Nothing stood a chance when he reached that point, Alred told me quietly. It was more toward the end of his life, those episodes became normal. I mulled over his words, tilting my head. So, you're saying being the historian changed him? The war changed him. Nienna. I laughed. Wow. So much for those promises of not letting me turn into a heartless killer. I gave you my word. I won't let it happen. Yeah? And how are you going to stop it, huh? How? He sipped his coffee, ignoring my question. We sat in tense silence for a few minutes, until I dropped the subject and went back to how his night went. Why do you care? He countered after I asked him again about his impromptu date. I can't ask you about your personal life? Nothing happened. Satisfied? He pushed back from the table and marched to the doors. If you're already up, we might as well get started on your training. Let's go. Oh, come on. Now, Nienna. Rolling my eyes at his bossiness, I drained my coffee, snatched a biscuit and a few pieces of bacon, and hurried after Alred to the training courtyard. Not sure what the point of all this is, I complained, when he handed me a wooden practice sword a couple of minutes later. I end up on my ass every time. You know, I think I'm not fit for the fighting aspect of this. Or coordinated enough. You need practice, he said, as he did every time I tried to get out of this side of my historian training. Meditating with Thalia or Jurgis was more relaxing. Granted, I sucked at finding balance and being aware of my physical surroundings during a vision, but no one yelled at me during those sessions. Or scolded me. Or smacked me in the ass with a wooden sword, when I repeatedly failed to reach a meditative state in the first place. Why don't you use guns? Human technology, including guns, don't work in our world, he replied. Magic disrupts them. Right, yeah, I totally knew that. He stood at the ready and waited, his brow arched in the way that was starting to drive me crazy. Why did he have to be so handsome all the time? It was the scruffiness that had turned into a beard recently. It had to be. And his eyes, those dark green eyes with those gold flecks that glimmered whenever I annoyed him. His shirt stretched across his muscled chest, and I remembered all too easily how nice it was to be pressed against his body. Nienna. What are you thinking about? Huh? Nothing. Why? His lip twitched, but there was no smile. There hardly ever was these days. You're blushing. Great. I rolled my shoulders, shook out my hands, and planted my feet in the defensive stance he'd taught me the last few weeks. Ignoring his question, I nodded. I was ready to go, but he didn't move. What? He breathed out heavily through his nose, scratching at his beard. The glint in his eyes said he wanted to say something. Instead, he shook his head and without a sound charged forward. I raised my wooden sword and blocked 3 strikes, until he spun around and whacked me right in the ass with the broadside of his sword. I yelped, spinning around with a glare. He gave me a second to recover, and came after me again. Sweat dripped down my face, and my entire body screamed when the 2 suns reached their peak a few hours later. Alred bested me too many times to count, and with a yell I threw myself at him, trying to tackle him. He easily sidestepped me, whacked me in the back this time. I hit the stones with a grunt, fell over and rolled onto my back, looking up at the clear blue sky while I panted. He stalked toward me, swinging his sword casually at his side. He opened his mouth for what I knew would be a lecture. I twisted my body, wrapped my legs around his, and with a furious shout rolled into him. He cursed and ended up on the stones right next to me. Ha! He flipped back to his feet with no effort at all, holding out his hand for mine. Nicely played. Think you earned a break. Just a break? I put my hand in his, biting my cheek to stop myself from reacting to how perfect holding his hand was. He pulled me to my feet, and I started to hand over the sword when a searing pain shot across my forehead. I gasped, falling forward into Alred's arms. Images appeared in my mind, and then I was standing in the gardens of Velbam. There were no flowers left. The grounds, the flower beds, the trees, all were charred. The statues had been toppled over, and dead bodies were scattered about. These weren't soldiers. All of them were innocents. I tried to turn away, but the vision held me in its clutches, forcing me to see whatever atrocity the goblins had planned for the elves. Slowly I turned. The crackling of the fire consuming the towering trees cut through the thick silence. Banners I didn't recognize had been erected along the wall around Central Tower. Goblin clan sigils, maybe. A howl pierced the air. I whirled around in time to see goblins charging out of the gates, straight for me. A jagged blade rose high into the air, and when the bastard holding it prepared to cleave me in half, I was thrown out of the vision. I screamed, flailing, "Get out of the way of the sword." Nienna. Look at me. Calm down. You're back. I stilled as Alred cupped my face. I sagged in his arms, shivering. Why do they have to feel so real sometimes? It's how the visions work, sadly. What did you see? I tried to get up, but my knees buckled, and I sank to the ground with a muttered curse. Take a minute, let yourself recover. He pressed his hand to my forehead. A soothing coolness spread from his palm, glowing briefly with his magic. The lines around his eyes crinkled with worry. You're feverish. Happens every time. It's normal, right? Yes, normal, he replied stiffly. I tried to get up again, but when my legs wouldn't cooperate, he scooped me up and carried me away from the courtyard. You don't have to do this. My cheeks burned when his hands curled protectively around me. Alred, seriously, I think I can walk now. Put me down. Please. His jaw clenched, he set me on my feet, kept one arm around my waist to support me, and we ambled the rest of the way inside. I took a deep breath, and hated how even after we spent all morning training, he smelled of campfire and cedar. When I leaned into him, he slowed even more. Are you going to pass out? No, sorry. I'm fine. I straightened and pushed away. See? I'm good. I need to write down what I saw. After a few unsteady steps, I managed not to fall over. I hurried to my chambers. He followed but kept his distance. As we went, I told him what I saw, recalling the vivid details with a shudder. But it's not happening soon. You're sure? Yeah. I don't know how I know, but I do. I stilled outside my door. There's something else. It might be nothing. I rubbed the back of my neck, a headache forming behind my eyes. You know what, it's probably nothing. Never mind. Alred caught my hand when I went to open the door. Tell me. I glanced at his hand on mine, and he swiftly pulled his away. Fire, I said, the word coming out garbled. There's been a fire in every vision I've had. It's a war, he said. I shook my head. Not like this. The fire at first, I thought the fire was maybe my seeing things, but it's alive. What do you mean? His shoulders tensed, and his hand slipped to the dagger sheathed at his hip. These actions told me I was, in fact, not merely overreacting. It aims for people, targets them. And it avoids the goblins. But fire can't do that, right? It's merely fire. Take the remainder of the day to rest, he said, ignoring my question. I'll see you later. Alred. He paused with his back to me. Rest, Nienna. You did well today. He stormed down the corridor, his boots echoing off the walls. I slipped into my chambers, questioning what he was hiding from me, when a rush of dizziness had me grabbing the doorframe. The same voice from this morning whispered through my thoughts, but the words were too quiet to hear. The dizziness passed, and the voice faded. I told myself it was nothing, and hurried to write down my latest vision.
Chapter 2. Alred. Anything. Jurgis gave me an annoyed huff, not looking up from the massive book he currently had his nose buried in. If you would give me more than 5 minutes to read, I might be able to give you an answer. And will you stop with the stomping? You're going to drive me insane. I skidded to a stop. Sorry. Why are you so anxious to know about dark magic anyway? Something Nienna saw. She saw dark magic. Jurgis exclaimed. You're sure? I don't know if it's dark magic or what it is. I simply need an answer to explain what she's seeing. What exactly did she tell you again? I ran my hands through my hair, tilting my head back while I studied the high domed ceiling of the old library. Lanterns hung from chains at various heights, flooding the room with a soft glow. The library was in the heart of the central tower. The curved walls were lined with books, scrolls, parchments, and documents collected throughout the centuries. 3 sets of narrow stone steps led to the higher levels with twisting corridors and cramped rooms stuffed to the brim with texts. Jurgis, thankfully, was one of the few elves who understood the haphazard organized system of this place. She said the fire moved like it was alive. It targeted people. Fire didn't do that last time I checked. And she's sure that's what she saw. In every vision. You and I both know if she's right, that it's not fire she's seeing. Jurgis paled, his blue eyes flaring. That's not simply dark magic. That's asking for an apocalypse. You have to tell the 7. Not until I have something solid to tell them. There could be some other fire creature that's not coming to my mind. Until I know for certain, I'd prefer not to cause panic. Has your gut instinct ever been wrong? He questioned. If you feel it's that ancient beast, then it most likely is. We knew the goblins were going to try to end us, but using magic like this, letting such a monster free, it's crossing a line, even for them. I agreed wholeheartedly with his words. Garrick had told Nienna there had to be a reason why the calling was showing her visions so far into the future. This had to be why. The goblins' attacks had slowed over the past 5 weeks. They hadn't stopped, but it was quieter than it had been in a long time. Find the answer for me, please, I told Jurgis. Once you have, we'll speak to the 7. And Nienna? I breathed out slowly. I will tell her when she needs to know, and not a second sooner. Leaving him to his search, I prowled the corridors, avoiding the wing where Nienna's rooms were. My path took me to the gardens and beneath the willows. Even this far away, her distress and unease tried to drag me back inside. If I wasn't careful, I'd end up standing outside her door like I did most days. She had yet to catch me there, but one of these times she would. This morning, the pull to her had been so strong, it tore me out of a deep sleep, and had me grabbing my sword until I realized she must have had another nightmare. Her bad dreams weren't the only reason I was on edge every freaking day. Each time she had a vision, she was left weak, feverish, and hardly able to move. I'd studied the past historians, and had been with Garrick for 27 years. Not one of them recorded suffering ill effects from the visions. And yet each time Nienna was sucked into one, I had to watch while her calling sapped her. The fever afterward lasted anywhere from a few minutes to a few hours. My magic soothed her and chased away the chill, so she stopped shivering but nothing more. She was typically drained of energy, and had to take it easy for the rest of the day. I came to dread each time her eyes glowed with a new vision, instead of being anxious to know what she saw. Part of me wished she'd never have to go through another one, if only to spare me from the stress. I haven't seen you look like that, well, ever. I whipped around to find Trollian headed toward me. I don't look like anything. You can tell that to the angry frown on your face. I heard Nienna had another vision. Did she share it with the seven? Yes, and like the last ones, they too believe it's in the far future, as she said. Trollian rested his shoulder against a willow tree. Alred. What? I snapped, continuing my pacing in the grass. His brow rose and he whistled. Damn. I was wondering. Wondering what? I muttered. Nothing's going on. Really? I glared. He shrugged. I think I'm allowed to be concerned when the historian I'm tasked with protecting is not experiencing visions the way she should. And she's not sleeping. Nothing about Nienna's destiny is playing out as it ought to. Something's wrong, and I don't know what. And that's it. You're only worried because she's the historian. I ceased my pacing and nodded. What are you talking about? Nothing. If you're so worried about her, why don't you ease up a bit? You've been going nonstop with the training since we sent her friend back to the human world. There's no time to take a break. She has to be ready. Are you telling me you don't trust yourself to keep her safe? I placed my hand on the hilt of my dagger. I will protect her with my life, but if she can't defend herself, and the enemy slips by me, kills me, I can't let anything happen to her. Still, a break would do you both some good. Nienna was far behind where the other historians had been in their training by this point, but Trollian was right. I needed time to understand her visions, and she could use a day off. I might be pushing her too hard. Was that why the visions hit her so intensely? Wincing with guilt that I might be the reason for her distress, I muttered, maybe a couple of days off. You won't regret it. I grunted, not sure I believed him. You going to tell me why Jurgis is frantically searching through the library and looking like he's about to lose it? It's not a conversation I want to have here. How about we head to the tavern? You look like you could use a drink. Or several. I debated leaving Nienna alone, but ale wasn't a bad idea. And I was working on keeping my distance from her when we weren't training or speaking with the seven. However, the notion of kissing her rose in my mind at least once a day. Tamping down the urge was a fight I'd won so far. One of these days, I'd lose, and now was not the time to be starting a relationship that wasn't good for either of us. Trollian and I left Central Tower behind and headed to the tavern. We barely sat down when an elf dragged out the chair beside me. She beamed at me, her dark hair flowing over her shoulders in waves that shimmered in the sunlight pouring through the stained glass window. Hi, she said, her voice like silk. Her green silk dress was elegant and clung to her like a second skin. Do I know you? I asked, wondering if this was going to be like last night when Celica randomly appeared at the tavern. And the time before that, when another gorgeous elf sought me out. She held out her hand, and on instinct I shook it. Rena. And you are Alred, the protector. That must be a fascinating duty, being there for the historian all the time. Probably exhausting too. You look like you need to have a night of fun. How about I buy you an ale? That's precisely what he needs, Trollian chimed in from across the table. I kicked him in the shin, and he cringed. What? Let the pretty lady buy you an ale. I'm sorry, but I'm not exactly in the fun kind of mood right now. She pouted, scooting closer. When she rested her hand on my arm, I gritted my teeth. All right, not like last night. She was far pushier than Celica had been. Listen, I said, picking up her hand and setting it on the table, I'm not looking to date anyone or be with anyone. Oh, come on. I can change your mind. We can have a few ales, dance a bit. I think if you let yourself loosen up, you'll see that a woman in your life is exactly what you need. I tensed at her words. Did someone send you here? What? She said through her laughter. No. Every woman in Velbam knows who you are, and this is the longest you've stuck around. You're quite the wanted bachelor. Right. Sorry, love, but it's not going to happen. She sighed, leaned in and kissed my cheek. If you change your mind, I'm usually here in the evenings. Feel free to find me. I glared at Trollian as soon as she was gone. What? I didn't do anything, he muttered, but he grinned like an idiot. Are you doing this to me? Doing what? That's the fifth woman who's hit on me in the last 2 weeks. Whatever you think you're doing, it stops. Now. I'm not interested. Is that because you're interested in someone else? No, it's because I can't afford to be distracted, I lied, because the woman I was interested in I couldn't have. Shouldn't have. Trollian nodded, still grinning. Did you want to hear about Jurgis or not? Yes, no more talk of women. Tell me. Keeping my voice low, I informed him of what Nienna had told me after her latest vision. As a captain, he was there for the meetings with the Seven regarding what the historian had seen, but I doubted Nienna would mention the fire. She believed it was merely a coincidence. When I reached the part about the flames being alive, his blue eyes darkened like the ocean during a storm, and he cursed. Now, do you understand my concern? I asked. It can't be that, he muttered. They wouldn't dare. Maybe not all of them, but if IOC is vying for control of the clans and he lets his sons make the decisions, they might not care what chaos they're about to unleash on Kenzugrod. It can't be controlled. It would destroy them once it finished with us. We drank our ale in silence, the noise of the tavern setting my teeth on edge. I drained my mug, paid, and told Trollian I'd see him later. I hoped a walk would clear my head, but all it did was give me too much time to think about what these visions meant. I wanted an end to the war, but what Nienna saw wasn't the end I thought was possible. The first vision Nienna had, the nightmare she experienced every night, was that where we'd end up? Was that really the end of everything? Without meaning to, I ended my walk outside her door, pulled to her as I always was by her fear. I raised my hand to knock, but there was nothing I could say to make that fear go away. Quickly, I backed off and went to the courtyard to train with the other soldiers. Wearing myself out to the point of exhaustion so I'd sleep wouldn't be a bad thing right now. I sent a message to Nienna's rooms late last night, letting her know training for today was cancelled. It proved to be anything but a relaxing day for me, and I checked on Jurgis, who was hidden behind a stack of books in the library. He thought he'd found something that might explain the fire monster rampaging through Nienna's visions. I didn't get to hear about it. He shoved me out the door, saying I was nothing but a distraction. He slammed the door shut in my face, and I was left to wander the grounds, mind racing with what we were possibly walking into. Alred, Thalia called, and I turned to find her and 2 members of the Seven coming toward me. You look terribly deep in thought. I bowed to Thalia. Galan and Dane shook my hand. They were brothers from the Goblins' court. Their gold irises constantly shifted through several hues of gold and copper, then back again, much like the sun. They stood as tall as I did, and once upon a time had been soldiers before they were summoned to be members of the Seven. "Something troubles you," Dane stated with his deep baritone voice. "When doesn't something trouble me?" I replied. "Does this have anything to do with why Jurgis is in the library?" Thalia asked. "I was going to come to you once I had answers, but if you'd like to know now, then we can talk." "No," Goblin said, his voice the same as his brother's. "If we all need to know, it can wait. How is the historian's training going?" "As well as can be expected, considering where she started." "I assume Thalia has told you of her progress, or attempted progress, on controlling the visions." Nienna had shared her frustrations with me several times about how she had yet to reach a successful meditative state. I hesitated, clasping my hands behind my back, and shook my head. "I'm sorry, it's nothing." "Alred, if you think it's something, then I doubt it's nothing," Thalia commented. I hated to add more worries to their shoulders, but it was my duty to inform them of any and all issues with the historian. Her visions leave her weak, so weak she can hardly stand. And she's feverish afterward. I've never heard of a historian having such problems. I certainly never saw them with Garrick. She's in the first stages of her calling. It's only been a little over a month, Goblin said. She's adjusting to the power of the tome. I would give her time. Her being half-human could also be complicating the situation, but I wouldn't worry yet. The elf's words did nothing to soothe my troubled mind. Goblin and Dane walked on, but Thalia lingered behind, a knowing look in those silver-blue eyes of hers. She motioned down the path. "Why don't we take a walk?" she suggested. "You're sure there's nothing else bothering you?" "Aside from what Jurgis is researching, no, nothing." "I don't know why you insist on lying to me." I smiled. "Can you blame me? I'm not exactly one to gossip. You know me better than that, I would hope." We made it a few steps when she spoke again. "So, Trollian tells me you're quite a hit with the women lately." My head fell back, and I grunted, irritated. "I don't understand it. You're an attractive elf who's single, and you hold one of the most respected positions in all of Kenzugrod. What's not to understand? But why now? I've been in Velbem for nearly 30 years. It's as if someone's telling them I'm looking for a relationship." I stopped cold and cursed. "That's precisely what someone's doing." "What, trying to set you up?" "I could think of worse things to be done to you." "It's not what I want," I replied quietly. I'd thought it was Trollian behind the matchmaking, but he knew me too well. I wouldn't simply give in and start dating some random elf who came up to me. I continued walking, Thalia with me, and we turned the corner in the gardens. The hedges parted, and Nienna's laugh struck my ears. I glanced up to spot where she and Trollian were talking, across the flower beds. No, not talking. Flirting. Openly flirting. He handed her a flower, and she took it with a smile that lit up her green eyes. I looked away, storming off the other direction. "Ah, so that's what's got you all twisted and turned around," Thalia said, staying with me. "What?" "Nienna." I tripped on a small rock and promptly righted myself. "If you mean I'm worried, as her protector, then yes, you'd be right." "No, I mean you have feelings for her." I picked up the pace, until Thalia grabbed my arm, tugging me to a stop. "Alred, there's nothing in the rules that say a protector can't be with the historian. Why not simply tell her? I can't afford to be distracted, and if I give in to these feelings, that's what I will be. Her life depends on my staying focused." "Yes, because you're so focused right now." I opened my mouth, then shut it, hanging my head. "She's pushing me away, too." "Why would she do that?" "I have several theories, but I'm not about to ask her because it can't happen." "You're the only one saying that," Thalia pointed out. "We might live for hundreds of years, but our lives are still limited. We only have so much time to enjoy them and be happy, genuinely happy. We may never see the end of this war. It could kill us tomorrow or next week. We can't know for certain. But, she added, squeezing my arm until I looked into her eyes, I plan on making the most of every moment I have, and that means not hiding behind my sense of duty. If you want to be with her, then tell her before it's too late. She gave my cheek a hard pat and strolled away, her violet dress trailing on the stones. Eventually, I returned to my chambers, not trusting myself to stay away from Nienna. I pictured her talking with Trollian, and found myself analyzing the scene I'd witnessed. He'd flirted with her. Had she flirted back? Maybe I was merely seeing things. Not that it matters, I spat at my reflection. She can flirt with whoever she likes. I gripped the edge of the vanity as a jealous voice whispered through my mind that she seemed content to only push me away, but not Trollian. I stalked around my room, unable to stop picturing her with him. I'd been hard on her, yes, but the times we kissed, I know she experienced the same feelings as I did. The same connection that went beyond our bonds as historian and protector. Granted, for the few weeks after, I pretended it didn't happen. That didn't mean I felt nothing for her. This was why I hated the notion of caring for someone. Loving them. It was too complicated. Too disruptive. Not that I loved Nienna. It wasn't possible, not this soon. When evening came around, and I joined the others in the hall for dinner, I watched for Nienna and Trollian, determined to find out if she was returning the flirting. I told myself to stop acting like a lovesick child, and let it be. Sulking over my food, I ignored the conversations around me until Nienna's voice made my ears prick. I found her easily, and right beside her was Trollian. They sat at the other long table, excitedly talking about something. I bit my tongue and winced. I was draining my goblet of wine when someone sat down beside me. All I spotted was the trailing long blonde hair. I hunched my shoulders. Not in the mood for your flirting. Go away. Trollian was right, you are in a foul mood. I glanced up to see Commander Callie Leafson sitting beside me, smirking. Sorry. Thought you were someone else. Someone trying to flirt with you. It's a long story. Oh, I was told. You're the talk of Velbam. Someone said you're currently available. Wonder who that was. I poured more wine for myself and filled her goblet too. I have no idea, but whoever it is, I'm going to kill them. I'm not available, and the endless stream of flirting is going to drive me insane. I have enough crazy to deal with. I'll bet you do. Nienna laughed, and Trollian leaned in closer to her. When his hand rested on hers, the fork in my hand didn't stand a chance. The metal bent with a tiny spurt of magic escaping my control, and Callie's brow arched. I dropped the bent utensil, pushed my plate away, and satisfied myself with wine. Never knew you to be the jealous type. I'm not. Tell that to the poor fork you just killed. I gave the fork a heated glare. She can talk to whoever she wants. I don't care. You can say that all you want, but you look like you're about to go over there and murder Trollian. Can we talk about something else? Anything else? She held up her hands. Fine, be an idiot. What do I care? Callie, the hair on the back of my neck stood, and a faint pain shot across my forehead. I leapt to my feet. Nienna's eyes glazed over. The gold flecks glowed, and she was sucked into a vision. Trollian and the elves around her froze. The rest of the hall fell silent. For a second she seemed to be all right, then her mouth fell open and she screamed. I sprinted around the tables toward her. She toppled back off the bench and into my arms. I held her while she thrashed violently, screaming as if she was being physically attacked. Trollian and Callie knelt next to me as we struggled to keep Nienna from hurting herself on the stone floor. Her back arched, and she threw her head to the side, wincing in pain. I held her head gently but firmly, and managed to get her onto my lap, so at least she wouldn't bash her skull in. The glow of her eyes brightened, and she let out one more blood-curdling scream. Her body sagged, and she went still. Panic struck me. Nienna. She gasped for air. The glow dimmed in her eyes, and they shut. Nienna, come on. Open your eyes. I gave her shoulders a gentle shake. Damn it, woman, look at me. Her breathing calmed, and too slowly her eyes fluttered open. All red. She tried to sit up. Gently, I stopped her. Give yourself a minute. She was burning up but shivered. I glanced at Callie and Trollian. They rose and called for everyone to clear the hall and for someone to bring Jurgis. Thalia was the only member of the 7 currently present. She stayed behind, giving Nienna a worried look, and sat on the floor beside us. Fire. There was so much fire, and it had a face. I swear it had a face, Nienna whispered. I saw it. I need to write it down. She tried to get up again, but I refused to let her move. I pressed my palm to her forehead, attempting to ease the fever away as I'd been doing. She stared at me, her brow wrinkling. I'm fine, I promise. I scowled, shaking my head. I don't care if you think you're fine. You're not moving yet. She blinked and finally glanced around. Wait, how did I get on the floor? You had a convulsion fit, whatever it's called, I explained. Whatever you saw, it had you screaming like you were being torn apart. She gulped, and I smoothed her hair from her face. She reached up, catching my hand, and squeezed it. I've got you, I tried to reassure her. She was flushed from the fever, with terror in her gaze. I was dying, she whispered, and my heart pounded with my rising anxiety. The fire, it came right for me. It tore through a line of soldiers, and then it was all around me. I couldn't get away, and everyone was dying. She scrunched her eyes shut. I can still smell their skin burning. You can write it all down in a moment. Rest. She closed her eyes and slowly relaxed. Thalia said she would send someone to fetch the tome. Jurgis arrived a short moment later, his gaze heavy with fear. He nodded. His expression said it all. Mentally, I cursed. Evidently, he found what he was looking for, which meant we were all in far more trouble than I'd first realized.
Chapter 3. Nienna. My hand cramped. I dropped the pen. There, that's all of it. I shoved the tome across the table toward the 7, and tugged my sweater tighter around my shoulders. Alred had it brought to me when I couldn't stop shivering. His magic was doing less and less to combat the after effects of the visions. I sat at the table nearest to the massive hearth in the hall, but every time a log crackled or an ember popped, I recoiled. Alred was right there, keeping his hand on my shoulder. The last vision had hit too close to home. All I kept seeing were the bright orange flames as they roared and surrounded me, blocking me off from Alred and the other elven soldiers. I'd been trapped with no way out. A leering face had appeared in the fire, cackling while I was burned away, bit by bit. A log fell into the hearth, and I flinched with a yelp. Damn it, sorry, I mumbled. It's all right, Alred told me sternly. You're allowed to be freaked out. Those flames, I could feel them, I whispered. He sat on the bench beside me, taking hold of my hands, pulling me from the horrifying images. Don't. You saw it once, you've written it down, there's no reason for you to keep reliving it. The gold flecks in his eyes flared. He cleared his throat, standing and returning to his place at my back. This vision is like the others? Thalia asked. Yeah. I don't think it's happening anytime soon, but that fire. It's been in all of them. I carefully flipped through the previous pages. This can't be right though. I've seen so many different futures about being attacked. My being attacked. If the fire kills me, how do I end up in that battle with Alred? If you're seeing further out than any other historian, it's possible these are all different outcomes depending on what actions we take, Thalia suggested. Great. So I might be killed by a horde of goblins, or devoured by fire. That's comforting. Alred squeezed my shoulder. I reached up and placed my hand over his. A violent shiver racked my body, and he held me up. I'm fine, I whispered, though I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince. Thalia gave me a questioning look, until Jurgis stepped forward and laid a stack of parchment on the table. I wasn't sure what he'd been researching in the library, but from the shaking of his hands it wasn't good. I'd hoped to be sharing different news, but I'm afraid Alred's fears are correct. This is what I've been looking for. Alred told me what Nienna has been seeing. He slid the parchment toward the 7, and I sat forward trying to see what they saw. What made their brows furrow, and a few of them speak in Elvish. Those words sounded like curses. I strained to make out the writing on the page, but couldn't comprehend it. "What's it say?" I asked Jurgis. Thalia answered, but I had no idea what she'd said as it was Elvish. "Fire demon," she added, switching to English. "One that hasn't been seen in Kenzugrot for centuries because he was locked away in a prison, deep in the Crimson Mountains." "By whom?" "By the elves and goblins, with help from the gods many years ago. This is ancient history," she explained. "They can't unleash him. It's not possible. That magic is far too dark to be controlled. They would have to be insane. And the cage itself is impossible for any mere mortal, elf or goblin, to break. It's simply not feasible. They want the war over as much as we do," Alred said. "This might be the way they do it. How else do you explain what she's been seeing?" He tapped the tome's pages. "Every single vision, Thalia. Every single one has had a fire in it, and none of them take place in the near future. Whatever they're planning, it involves breaking him out of that damn cage. It has to. Even if they were going to try, they can't reach him." Another of the 7, I believe Thalia called him Dane, spoke up. "That cage is buried in the mountains and guarded by creatures of old sent by the gods themselves. There's no getting past them." "Then why does she see it?" Alred argued. "Why? You give me a reason that makes sense, and I'll believe you." Dane remained quiet. The tension in the room grew until it pressed in around me, making me dizzy. Weakly, I grabbed the edge of the table and fought to stay conscious. Voices murmured around me. When I opened my eyes, I was in Alred's arms. We weren't in the hall anymore. He carried me through the corridors on a path to my chambers. "How did we get here?" "You passed out," he replied, sounding relieved. "Least you're awake now." "I can walk." He came to a stop in the hallway, his hands tightening their hold on me. "You're too weak and you need to rest. I'll carry you to your rooms, and if you try to argue with me, I'll toss you over my shoulder instead." I gave up and let him hold me, sinking into the warmth radiating from his chest. I fought the urge to curl into him. "What did they decide?" I asked, needing the distraction. "About the fire demon, I mean." "Nothing yet, and you don't need to be worrying about it either. I'm the one seeing it, remember? I think I'm allowed." "Not when you're this weak." "I told you I'm fine." His brow arched, his heated gaze landing on my face. Concern warred with aggravation in those green depths. "You're not fine, at least not at this moment, so you'll listen to me for once and rest." "Please," he added belatedly. "Tonight I'll rest, but tomorrow you have to fill me in on what they talk about." "I do not agree to anything until I see how you are in the morning." I considered arguing, but another wave of dizziness had me cringing. We were at my door the next time I opened my eyes. I wasn't about to admit I must have passed out again. From the way Alred's jaw clenched, he already knew. Gently he set me on my feet, and I crawled into bed. I expected him to turn around and leave, but he stayed long enough to drag the blankets up and tuck me in. He stoked a fire in the hearth, and with a last lingering look I didn't understand, he left, pulling my door closed behind him. I rolled over, turning my back to the door, and drifted to sleep, with Alred cedar scent surrounding me. The crackling of the fire was soothing once more, and I slept. Goblins surrounded me. My sword dripped with their black blood. Alred shouted for me, and I spun around, striking down another goblin coming to kill me. Alred's blade moved too fast to follow. Seconds later, he was at my side. He wrapped one arm around my waist and drew me in close. His lips barely brushed against mine. He spun me away from him, and we fought side by side. A roar sounded from behind the goblin lines. I froze. Fire burst into a tall column, swirling and cracking as embers exploded within it. A face appeared, glowering at us from within those depths. Alred held my hand in his, and the column shot toward us, taking down everything in its path. I glanced at Alred and he nodded. We held our swords high and rushed forward to meet it. Nienna. I thrashed, trying to get away as hands gripped my shoulders. Nienna, open your eyes. It's simply a nightmare. You have to wake up now. The strong scent of cedar flowed over me. I stilled, opened one eye, then the other, then sagged into Alred's chest. He wrapped his arms around me, holding me while he ran his fingers through my hair. He spoke in Elvish. I had no idea what he was saying, but his voice alone was enough to calm me down. Sorry, I muttered, sitting back. Didn't mean to wake you. I wasn't sleeping yet, anyway. He pursed his lips, studying me carefully. Same nightmare. For the most part. Few details were different, but yeah, lots of goblins and fire and us pretty much dying. I shivered, and he dragged the blankets up, tucking me in again. When he pressed his hand to my forehead, I leaned into it, wanting to keep touching him in one way or another. His eyes narrowed and he drew back way too soon. Fire's almost out. I'll build you another one. He slipped from my bed, stoked the embers, tossed a couple of logs on the pile. Flames lit the room. I climbed out of bed on shaky legs, and taking a blanket with me, sat down in one of the armchairs by the hearth. Were you really awake? Of course. Liar. I pointed to the other chair, and to my surprise, he sank into it. In the flickering light, I admired the broadness of his shoulders and his ruggedly handsome face with that damned beard I was getting accustomed to. His hair, usually pulled back in a play, hung loose tonight, making him even more attractive in a brutish mountain man sort of way. The black shirt he wore was parted, giving me a glimpse of the toned body beneath, along with a few scars. His leather pants completed his ensemble, making me briefly wonder what he slept in. I gave myself a little shake to stop that train of thoughts in its tracks, and returned my attention to his face. His eyes narrowed, studying the fire, while the muscles in his neck tensed. Was he attempting to stop himself from doing something? This bond we share, is that how you know I'm having nightmares? His smile only lasted a second. You picked up on that, did you? Hard not to. Guess that's why you've been sleeping like shit too. Sorry about that. Don't be. How can I not? I should be able to deal with my dreams. Nightmares, whatever. All part of being the historian. I tugged at a loose thread on the blanket. Was it like this for Garrick? The nightmares? Alred shifted in his chair, resting his ankle on his left knee. They were rare, but he had them. And the weakness I feel afterward? Yes, that as well. I slumped, chuckling. You need to learn to lie better. Nienna. I held up my hand. Something's wrong with me. I knew it. The visions and what I'm going through each time is all wrong. Garrick said I would receive the visions differently, but nothing about this seems right. Tell me I'm wrong. Alred licked his lips, folding his hands on his lap. You're wrong. Well, that sucked. He scratched his beard, the gold in his eyes flaring, competing with the reflection of the fire. There could be several reasons why what you're going through is vastly different from the other historians' experiences. You are half human. You might need a longer adjustment period, and this could all fade away in time. Or I'm messed up. You're not messed up, he snapped. I stilled at the fierceness in his words. He coughed, rubbing the back of his neck, appearing nervous. You're not. What you're going through can be explained, and I don't want you worrying about it. That'll make it worse. But I'm not even doing my job. What are you talking about? You have visions almost daily. That is the job. If anything, you're an overachiever. Garrick never had so many visions in such a short span of time. I shook my head, dumping the blanket on the chair as the urge to get up and walk hit me. I paced in front of the fire, my nightgown swirling around my legs. I picked at my nails until Alred called my name. He stood, reaching for my hands, holding them securely in his. "You won't have any nails left if you keep doing that," he murmured. One of the straps of my gown fell down my shoulder, and slowly he righted it. The touch of his fingers against my bare skin made my heart flutter and my breath quicken. His hand trailed up my shoulder to my neck, around to my nape, and he drew me in. I breathed his name, and his lips slanted over mine in a tender kiss. His other hand slipped to my hip. I fisted my hands in his shirt. I stood on his feet to reach his lips better. He chuckled. The sound was so rare it caught me off guard. Our kiss deepened. He wound his arm around my waist and lifted me off my feet. I could have spent the next few hours kissing him, but my vision returned to my thoughts. As did my fate. I broke the kiss and slipped from his arms. "Sorry. That was out of line. I'm sorry." He ran a hand over his mouth, turning his back to me, his shoulders hunched. "No, I kissed you. It won't happen again." The disappointment in his words made my chest ache, but I had to stay strong. "I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. No sugarcoating and no avoiding the answer. The truth. Please." With his hands on his hips, he turned, his face wearing the blank mask he was so good at putting on around me when we'd both pushed the limits of our relationship too far. "What do you want to know? How many villages have been attacked these last few weeks? How many elves have died?" I picked at my nails, ignoring his aggravated glance at my hands. "How many fights have the elves not been able to prepare for because of me?" He went so still, I couldn't even tell if he breathed. When he pinched the bridge of his nose, I waited for the lie. Instead, he said quietly, 2 villages have been lost. The goblins have attacked several of our outposts, and we've lost nearly 100 lives, give or take. The attacks have slowed but not ceased. Is that what you want to know?" I gulped, shaking my head as I staggered back. "That many?" "It's not your fault," he argued even as I shook my head. "You can't control what you see." "But what I'm seeing isn't right," I shouted. "I'm not seeing anything that's helping save the elves or change the war. I see shit that's so far out it'll probably never happen, and even those visions keep changing. But it's fine because we won't get to that point. We'll all be dead because I failed." "You haven't failed." "Yeah? Tell that to the dead elves." He scowled and came to me, ignoring the hand I held up to ward him off. He took me in his arms, hugging me, until all I could do was hug him back. "You are not failing. The calling is different for every historian. If you don't see these events that have come to pass, then you weren't meant to." "But why not? What's the point of all of this if elves are dying?" "I don't know. But I do know if you give up on yourself, if you keep letting these doubts get in the way of your destiny, then you will fail. How am I supposed to do that when everything I'm doing is wrong? All I'm doing is hurting people. I'm going to end up hurting." I bit back the words, tearing myself out of his arms. What was I doing? I couldn't let myself get this close to him. I smoothed my hands down my nightgown and squared my shoulders. His brow furrowed, and his hands opened and closed at his sides. "I'm sorry I woke you. But you can go. I'll be fine now. This bond between us will only grow stronger," he warned. "I will always know when you're injured. When you're afraid." He hesitated, then added quietly, "When you're hurting. That won't ever go away. I'm here for you." "I know," I replied. "But I ran my hands through my hair, failing to find the right words. "I'll see you in the morning," I finally said lamely. He bowed. "There is nothing wrong with you," he said once more when he reached the door. "I wish I could believe you." He took a step toward me, stopped, grunted, yanked open the door and slammed it shut on his way out. I plopped back down in the armchair, dragging the blanket around me, and glared into the fire, worried about how badly I was going to screw up my destiny, and who I'd be taking down with me in the process. I'd finally accepted my life was to be here in Kenzugrot with the elves, doing my part to stop the war. What I wondered now was if I had been wrong. Maybe I wasn't meant to be here. Perhaps the calling picked the wrong person. I needed one vision to prove me wrong and show me that I could be like Garrick and those who came before me. I stayed up all night, willing a vision to come. When sunlight chased the night from my room, I gave up, trudged to bed, and fell in, yanking the blankets up over my head.
Chapter 4. Alred. Nienna's one day of rest turned into 3. She was weak as she walked into the hall the morning following another vision. I kept a close eye on her, and steadily she recovered, but it was far too slow for my liking. The 7 continued their debate on what to do about the visions involving the fire demon. Sending scouts to see if the goblins were massing in the mountains was a risk no general was willing to take. Our numbers dwindled, and losing soldiers on a possible fool's errand was not an option. With no solid plan on the horizon, I prowled around Central Tower, staying clear of everyone as much as I could. I was the only one who needed to suffer from my anger. On the morning of the 4th day, Nienna bounded into the hall and plopped down across the table from me. The color was back in her cheeks, and there were no bags under her eyes. She chatted with Callie, who was seated beside her. I watched her eat a full meal for the first time in days. Callie excused herself. I was left with Nienna. She eyed me over her coffee. "I'm not going to self-combust," she said, breaking the silence. "Never said you were. Where have you been?" Her words were tinged with disappointment. "Feels like I haven't talked to you in a long time." "I've been close, but you needed rest and seemed to want space." She frowned, setting her mug down, and picked at her nails until she broke the one on her thumb. "Damn," she mumbled. "And you could have talked to me. I thought you were mad." "Why would I be mad?" She lifted her gaze, crossing her arms. "You tell me, since you still sound like you're upset." "I'm not. If you're better, we can resume training. I'll meet you in the courtyard." Alred. I left the hall, hoping she'd give me a few moments to get my head on straight. Hurried steps behind me let me know that wasn't the case. I grunted, wishing she would have taken one more day to recover. Not that it would have made a difference, but an elf can hope. You might think you're good at hiding your emotions, but you're not. I slid her a sideways glance as we walked through the corridors and out to the gardens. "I was merely concerned for you, nothing more." She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, something I'd wanted to do since she appeared in the hall. "Fine. Fine. Yeah, fine. I shouldn't be pushing you. So let's get back to training. Can't wait." The doubt was back in her voice, and I silently fumed. All that work to make her believe she could be as great as Garrick and the other historians who came before her had been wasted. After a quick look in her eyes, I witnessed the sliver of fear had grown. I tried to tell her the other night there was nothing wrong with her, but she clearly hadn't listened. She'd said pushing her wouldn't work. Today, I was going to prove her wrong. It was time she got over these doubts of herself and saw what she was capable of. She needed to believe she was a force of good and change. Otherwise, that fear would grow and eventually consume her. The nightmares would get worse, and if one of those visions of hers didn't kill us, her fear would. We reached the courtyard, and after she stretched and shook her hands out, I tossed her a practice sword. These were iron, but not sharp enough to cut. She glanced at it warily. I spun mine in my hand, waiting for her to get in position. "Alred. You can handle it." "Says who?" "The one training you." She gripped the hilt and shifted her feet. "What if I hurt you?" "Then I'd say you're making progress. You can't keep using wooden swords forever." Dread flared to life in her eyes, and right behind it, as always, was doubt. Gritting my teeth and telling myself this was for the best, I lunged forward with a yell. She parried my attack, cursing as I came at her again and again, not pulling any punches. She shoved me back and swiped at me with her sword. I sidestepped her attack and whacked her in the back of her thigh with my blade. She yelped, glaring at me over her shoulder. Good. I wanted her to be angry. Unlike the first time when I tried to piss her off while we trained, she didn't call me out for it. She adjusted her hold on the sword and came after me. Her attacks were fierce, and I had to pay close attention to avoid her. Our fight took us around the courtyard. She used her sword to deflect my attack and clocked me in the jaw. The hit had some weight to it, but not enough to knock me off my feet. I returned the favor, and she stumbled away. Knowing the enemy would never give her a chance to recover, I kept on her. She yelled, and when our blades crossed, she caught my wrist and headbutted me. I grunted. She cursed, holding her forehead. "Ow, shit, that hurt," she muttered. "Damn. Used the wrong part of your head." I raised my sword. She dove to the side at the last second, nailing me in the back with the broadside of her blade. My lip twitched from the sting. I pivoted, coming back to attack even harder. Nienna held her own. Sweat dripped down her face, but she never let up. Even when she was panting for air, she kept coming. The fire I glimpsed in her eyes grew. The warrior she could become appeared in her actions. We kept sparring, until she caught me in the face with the pommel of her sword. Blood spurted from my nose. She stilled, the sword dropping from her hand, clattering to the stones. "Alred. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hit you so hard." "It's fine," I said, pressing my fingers to my nose to staunch the blood. "It's a good thing." "It's good I almost broke your nose." "Are you crazy?" "It's a step in the right direction." "No, it's not," she whispered, the fight disappearing from her eyes. It slipped away, making room for the doubts to come back. Her eyes met mine, and I knew exactly what she pictured without her saying a damned word. "I think I need to take a break." "We're not finished." I stomped toward her and caught her elbow. "Not yet. You're bleeding." "We're finished." She stomped on my foot, tugging on her arm. "Let go." I said, "We're not done." I dragged her back to where she left her sword. "Pick it up." "What is wrong with you?" she snapped, tearing herself free. "I'm not doing this." "Yes, you are. Pick up the damn sword." She crossed her arms, squared her shoulders, and glowered. "No." "Fine, then this is really going to hurt." I came after her. She yelled, dropping to the ground and grabbing her sword. She barely got the blade up in time to block my attacks. I had her on the edge of the courtyard in 2 moves. "What are you doing, you psycho?" she shouted. "Making you fight. You can't stop in the middle of a battle because you drew blood," I lectured, our swords clashing together. "Blood is a part of the fight. You must get over the fact that you can hurt someone. That you can kill them." "I don't want to," she yelled back, pushing me away. "How many times do I have to say it? You keep thinking that vision showed you a worse version of yourself, but you're wrong. You were brought here to save people, and that's precisely what you're going to do if you will stop doubting yourself." She froze at my words. I swiped out her feet with my leg. She rolled into me at the last second, and we ended up on the ground. She scrambled to get up, but I pinned her to the stones. The fight went out of her. She gazed up at me, shaking her head. "I can't do this," she whispered, eyes pleading. "I can't, don't you get it? No matter how angry I get, all it does is remind me that one of these days I might go too far." "That woman in your visions, is she slaughtering innocent elves?" "Alred." I turned her face, so she had to look at me. "Answer the question." She shut her eyes. "No, she's not." "Then why are you running from her?" "I told you I don't want to lose myself." "Why is that so hard for you to understand?" "Did you ever think you're not losing yourself, but maybe you're finding who you're meant to be?" I challenged. "Deep down, did you truly believe you were meant to be a librarian your entire life?" She hesitated, and it was all the answer I needed. "I hate you." "I know." I was still pinning her to the ground, aware of her body pressed against mine. She shifted, the scowl on her face changing to one of confusion. I loosened my hold on her wrists and she dragged her fingers through my hair. The night in her room came back to me in a flash. I should have pulled back, but her eyes sucked me in until they were all I saw. I didn't want to feel this desire to hold her, but I did. Fighting it was becoming a chore. I wasn't the only one trying to keep distance between us, though. "What do you want from me?" I whispered. "Just tell me." Her brow wrinkled. I thought she was going to kiss me, until I ended up on my back. She pinned me down, breathing hard. "I can't," she muttered and scrambled to rise, then hurried away. I let my head fall to the stones, forcing myself not to chase after her and kiss her. Every day, my resolve to not get involved with her was chipped away. Hers seemed to be too, but there was something she wasn't telling me. I knew it had to do with her destiny. That was the only thing that made sense. She was worried about more than simply turning into a killer. I made it to my feet, tucked away the practice swords, and cleaned myself up. Jurgis was nowhere to be seen. Nor was Trollian. So I headed to the tavern alone, needing to get away from Central Tower and any chance of running into Nienna. I'd never been this conflicted about anything. I shut my eyes, and Nienna's face was there. I went to sleep at night, and she was in my dreams. The bond between us only made it worse. With every breath I took, I sensed her annoyance and her anger. Her doubts. All it did was amplify my aggravation. I slumped behind a table in the tavern, ordered an ale, and willed the roiling emotions to fall to the background for an hour. I needed a clear mind. I hadn't had that since before I'd found Nienna. The patrons of the tavern avoided me, and I enjoyed the table alone, watching as the others drank and danced, carrying on with their lives without a care for what happened outside of Velbem. The Seven had been careful about keeping the war away from this sacred location. Aside from the influx of soldiers and guards stationed around the borders, someone looking in from the outside wouldn't know it was a war. Life at the courts was vastly different from here. Fourleaf's fortress had been attacked more times than I could count. The structure still stood, but 2 towers had collapsed, and the wall was constantly being repaired. Oceanfall avoided attacks because of its location along the Trident Sea, but their outer lands burned from Goblin raiding warbands. Goldlands had suffered the worst of the attacks. Their territory bordered the Goblin lands, and the Hollow had been encroaching into their woods for the last 2 decades. But here in this tavern, there was no thought for the elves, giving their lives to protect their people for another day. Part of me understood the Seven's motives for keeping their people in the dark. Another part of me said they were all fools to cling to a world that no longer existed. A chair scraping across the floor pulled me from my dark thoughts, and an elf with long red hair sat down. She wore the clothing of a soldier and had a short sword strapped to her back. "Mind if I interrupt your brooding?" she asked, then ordered an ale. "I do. Not in the mood for company." "Looks like you need it." She tilted her head, studying me with vibrant gold eyes. "Rough day." "I'm sure with your duty, every day is rough." "What are you doing?" Her ale paused halfway to her mouth. "What do you mean?" "I mean, why are you here? I don't know you, and quite frankly, most do well to avoid me, so why are you here? Who told you to come and talk to me?" "No one." "You're lying." She took a drink of her ale and set the mug down with a shrug. "No one told me to come and talk to you, but I was told the Protector was currently looking for company. For a companion of sorts. A friend." I grunted, shoving my ale aside. "And who told you this?" "Other elves." "And who told them?" I snapped, growing weary of whoever had suddenly decided I needed a companion in my life. If it turned out to be Trollian, I was going to beat him senseless. All I know is it was a woman. My hands fisted on the table. Nienna. Nostrils flaring and my annoyance peaking, I tossed a coin on the table for the ale and strode away from the table. The woman called after me, but I ignored her. Nienna was doing this to me. She was the reason women were throwing themselves at me. And for what? so I could have someone in my life. She had to be doing this to mess with me, and it was going to stop. The last thing I needed was a distraction when I had to deal with her antics and outbursts and convulsions. I stormed through the gates of Central Tower and planned to march to her door until the sound of voices drew my attention. Using the statues and hedges as cover, I crept to the right and spotted Nienna with Trollian. They were talking, but she wasn't smiling or flirting this time. Her red cheeks and our bond told me she was pissed, probably at me. They walked a short bit, then came to a stop. Her voice was raised, but I was too far away to hear what she shouted. Trollian drew her into a hug. I stiffened, debating on charging over there and decking him. When he kissed her cheek, I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. He walked away, leaving her in the gardens. She meandered down another path, and I took one that would intersect with hers. She was too busy studying the ground to notice me. She was a foot away when I said her name. Her head snapped up. "What are you doing here?" "You and I need to talk." I crossed my arms, staring her down. "About what?" "About your being a pain in my ass." "Me? You're kidding, right?" "No, I'm not. At least I'm not trying to set you up with random elves." Her eyes widened, and she shoved her hands in the back pockets of her leather pants, probably to stop herself from picking her nails. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Yes, you do, and it stops right now. I do not need a companion. You could use a friend, though. Maybe someone who's not Jurgis or Trollian." "That is not a decision I need you to make for me," I muttered, taking a step closer. She moved back, keeping space between us. "I think if you gave one of them a chance, you'd see it's a good thing." "Not that I have any idea what you're talking about," she hastily added. "None at all." "Why are you doing this to me?" "Huh, why?" "I'm not doing anything," she insisted, not meeting my gaze. "But if I were, I'd say it's because you deserve to have someone in your life. Don't you want a relationship? A chance to be happy?" "The only woman I want is you," I blurted. I closed the distance between us, wrapped my arm around her waist, and kissed her as I should have done that afternoon. Her reaction was immediate. She clung to me, kissing me back until we were breathless. She dug her nails into my shoulders. I was ready to stop denying what we had, when she abruptly broke the kiss and staggered away. "Nienna." "No," she yelled, holding up her hand, her lips red from our kiss. "I can't, all right." "Why the hell not?" She gulped, the pain in her eyes striking me to my core. "I'm saving you. Just let me save you." "Save me from what?" I demanded, but she was rushing away. "Nienna." I started to catch up to her when she stopped suddenly on the path. A half second before she gasped in pain, a ghost of a headache shot across my forehead. I sprinted to her side. She fell. I barely managed to catch her in my arms. Within moments her eyes glowed and she screamed, thrashing in my arms. Holding her the best I could so she wouldn't hurt herself, I yelled for help. Several guards came running, and I sent one to fetch Jurgis. Nienna's screams worsened, and it was all I could do to stop her from hurting herself. When the convulsion finally ended, she went limp, her breathing harsh and her pulse racing. Her skin was hot. Jurgis told me to take her to her room to rest. He followed close behind, mumbling about making a cold compress for her forehead, and trying to think of what he could give her that might help prevent these occurrences. Gazing down at Nienna in my arms, my heart sank, knowing that if there was something wrong with her visions and her calling, it was the one thing I couldn't protect her from.
Chapter 5. Nienna. Groaning at the lingering headache, I rubbed my forehead and sat up. How had I gotten inside? I glanced around my room, but I was alone. I'd been outside, arguing with Alred when the vision hit. He must have brought me back here. Wincing from the aches in my body, I slid my legs over the side of the bed and stood. Or tried to. After 3 attempts, I stayed upright and, using the furniture and the wall, inched my way to the desk. Nienna, there's no need to fear. Soon, very soon. I gritted my teeth, willing the strange whispering voice to leave me alone. It faded quickly, leaving me with the sensation that something or someone watched me. I scolded myself to stop being paranoid. The vision. I had to write it down. That's what was important at that moment, not the phantom voice I'd heard. The fire had been present in the images, but this time I couldn't tell what was being destroyed. Looked like a fortress of some kind. Waves had been crashing in the background. Through the fire, a horde of goblins had stood off in the distance, watching the chaos. There had been a banner waving behind them, possibly for the bloodied fist, but the details were fuzzy. I'd been too focused on the fire tearing through the fortress, and the screams of the dying. A tense silence filled my ears, and another image came to life in my head. Something I'd seen after the vision of the burning fortress. Or before. I wasn't sure. A glimpse of red-dipped mountain peaks had appeared. I'd walked a worn path into a cave. Something dead had been lying inside, but they weren't elves or goblins. A voice had whispered in the shadows, and for some strange reason I thought it came from me. My stomach twisted in knots, and a wave of dizziness made me collapse onto the desk. I stopped trying to remember, and concentrated on not being sick. I looked for the tome so I could write down what I'd seen. What? I ran my hands over the desk, confused. The tome was gone. Leaving my boots behind, I padded barefoot out of my chambers and down the corridor, having to use the wall to help me stay upright. The further I walked, the clearer the moments before I'd had the vision came back to me. I stilled. Alred had called me out for trying to set him up with women. Then he said he only wanted me. My fingers went to my lips, recalling the kiss we'd shared. So much for my attempts to keep us apart. My plan wasn't working as I'd intended. If anything, I was being drawn to him more. Damn that elf, I muttered, my strength slowly returning. If the tome was missing, I assumed Alred had taken it for one reason or another. I headed toward the war room, where we met with the seven to discuss all my visions. The door was cracked open. Alred's angry voice filtered out. A loud thud made me jump. I reached the door but held back, listening. We can't keep denying what's right in front of us, he said. This isn't right. Nothing about this is, and it's only going to get worse. How do you know? A male voice asked. Have you seen her lately? She's becoming weaker, and each time she gets dragged into another vision, it takes more out of her. It took her nearly a week to recover from the last one. And what about this time? What happens when the next vision knocks her out for more than a few hours? We understand your concern, a woman said this time, but she's the historian. This is her destiny. She simply needs time to adjust. No, Thalia stated. No. I believe Alred's right. Something's wrong. It's not normal, Alred said, an edge to his voice. She can't keep going through this. And what about the visions? Why is she seeing so far into the future each time? And as she pointed out herself, the future keeps changing. We can't expect to plan for every possible outcome and succeed. He has a point, Goblin said. In all the centuries we've had historians, none of them had visions like hers. Certainly, none of them went into such violent convulsions either. We are right to be concerned. I agree with Alred. Something must be done. The goblins could be assembling for a major assault. If some dark force is holding sway over her visions, it could be disrupting her from seeing that. It might not be a dark force at all, another male voice said. The calling could be changing because of her. Someone else spoke, but it was like cotton had been shoved in my ears. The voices were muffled. Numbly, I backed away from the door, tripping over my feet. I took off running. Night had fallen, and I let the torchlight guide me through the gardens. I ran in random directions, not paying attention to where I went. I ended up catching my shoulder on the trunk of a willow tree and falling to the grass beneath it. I knew it. I knew this was all wrong. I was messing this up, all of it. They should have had someone else as the historian, but they got stuck with me. Instead of fixing their world and putting an end to the war, I was making everything worse. Elves were dying, and it was my fault. All of it was my fault. I dug my fingers into the ground, tears burning in my eyes. Why did you do this to me? I threw my head back, glaring at the stars through the swaying branches of the willow. Why? You messed up, Garrick. I can't do this. I shouldn't be here. I should be back in the library with my books, where I'm not hurting anyone. The tears slipped free and I let them fall. The weight of my destiny, and how I'd already failed, crashed into me. I sank to the ground, scrunching my eyes shut, wishing Alred had never found me. So many were going to die, and it was because of me. I wasn't supposed to be the historian. Why had I ever let myself believe I could be? That I belonged here? My dad might have been a great elf, and a historian of the ages, but I wasn't his legacy or his prodigy. I was nothing. I wasn't sure how long I'd stayed on the cold ground when a familiar voice cursed from close by. Boots rushed over stones, and familiar hands hoisted me upright. You're freezing. What are you doing out here? Alred quickly shrugged out of his leather jacket and wrapped it around me. He drew me into his chest, rubbing his hands down my arms to warm me up. Nienna? It's wrong, I murmured against his chest. All of it is wrong and upside down and twisted around. What are you talking about? I heard you. I heard all of you. I'm messing up. I'm failing, and everyone's going to die because of it. The goblins will win the war, and I can't do anything to stop it. More tears fell down my cheeks, but I was too exhausted to wipe them away. Alred lifted my chin, frowning. His thumb brushed away the tears, and he shook his head. You're not messing anything up. How can you say that? It's all I've been doing this whole time. No, it's not, he snapped. Blowing out an aggravated breath through his nose, he took a firm hold of my shoulders and looked into my eyes. Listen to me. Something else is at work in Kenzugrot. I've sensed it for a while now. So have the others. Whatever's happening to you in these visions, it's coming from what's affecting our world. You are not failing. But other historians aren't like you, I know. I think I know why. And no, I'm not going to tell you. Not tonight, at least. You took the tome away. Why would you do that if I'm not screwing up? I took it because I'm terrified of what it's doing to you. What? He ran a hand through his hair, muttering in Elvish. Ever since that damn tome came into your life and you started having visions, all it's done is make you weak. Every time you see something, it drains you. And after hearing you scream like that, I'm not sure how many more times I can stand to hear that sound and not be able to do anything. But you do, I told him quietly. I picked at my nails until he caught my hands, forcing them apart. You're the reason I find my way back. I hear your voice every time. It's what I hold on to so I don't get caught up in the chaos. You can hear me? I shrugged. Not always words, but your presence is there. It's like there's a string attached to you, and I'm able to follow it somehow. It wasn't like that with Garrick. Garrick's visions were never this violent. Figures I'd be the screw-up, huh? You are not a screw-up. These changes to the visions, they're not your doing. No one is blaming you for anything. The Seven and I are afraid for you, that's all. The visions won't stop, I reminded him. It's my calling. They'll keep coming. Don't remind me. He held me in his arms, not appearing in any hurry to let me go. A light breeze blew through the willow branches. They creaked and moved around us, their yellow leaves fluttering to the ground like snow. He picked them out of my hair. He tucked the loose strands behind my ears. My breath caught. I held him tighter. The strong scent of cedar surrounded me. I breathed it in, wishing we'd met under any other circumstances. If only that tome wasn't going to predict my death, if I could know for sure I'd live a long life, I could give in to what I felt for him. But at some point my calling would kill me, and Alred would be left behind, eaten away by guilt and heartbreak. His feelings for me, the ones he'd been trying to hide since our first kiss, were there on the surface. They were in the hands that held me tenderly, and the bright green eyes that searched my face for answers I couldn't give him. The rational part of my mind said it was too soon to feel this strongly for the elf anyway. I'd only known him a little over a month, and the bond we had was probably the reason for most of what I experienced. Sitting with him under that willow tree, gazing into each his eyes, my heart told me this calling was only part of my destiny. Alred was the other part. Despite my failings as a historian, I was right where I was supposed to be. I ran my fingers through his hair until I reached his ears, tracing them to their pointed tips. His hands shifted around to my back. Every second that passed in his arms was a gift and a curse. At some point, fate would intervene, like it had for Garrick and my mother. I'd be torn from him, and all he'd be left with were memories of me. I shifted away, meaning to go, but he turned me back to face him. "Don't," he whispered. "It's not fair," I murmured. "Nothing about this is." "What are you so worried about? This isn't only about the vision you had of us, is it?" When I didn't answer, his eyes narrowed. "Whatever you're trying to run from, just talk." My kiss cut off his next words, and he crushed me to his body. It was stupid, I knew it was stupid, but I couldn't stop myself. Being with Alred chased away all my worst doubts and fears until they were nothing. I came alive with him. I tugged on his arms, wanting him to be as close as possible. An owl hooted close by, and the noise had my head jerking to the right. Alred said my name, but a burst of pain exploded in my head. I fell to the side, clutching my hands to my temples. "I'm right here," Alred whispered, holding me. "Nienna?" Unlike the other visions, I was aware of the garden we sat in as well as the images flooding my mind. "Village," I rasped. "Small village. It's being attacked. Goblins." I winced. The second wave of pain made me curse. The moons. One's at half, the other's a crescent. Star. There's a red star on the horizon. The images slowed and finally faded. I sank into Alred's arms, catching my breath. I hadn't passed out, and there'd been no violent fit. Was that how the visions are supposed to be? Alred nodded. "You were able to stay grounded. It's a start." He smoothed my hair from my face. "That's what you saw? A village being attacked?" "Yeah, but I don't know how to tell which one." I glanced skyward, examining the night sky. "The moon phases, I've been studying them with Jurgis. That night it's coming soon, right? And the red star only appears in the sky once every 3 years. This is that year. I think you had a vision of something we're meant to stop." "How can you be so sure?" "One of these days," he said, gently pulling me to my feet, "you'll stop doubting yourself. Come on, let's get you inside and speak with the 7. Then, we're going on a little trip." "Trip?" "Yes." "Was there anything else in the vision?" "The village, were there any banners flying? Landmarks nearby?" I shut my eyes, recalling the vision in vivid detail. "There's a lake with a tree in the center of it, beyond the village square." "Ludlin. It's a village in the province of the Four-Leaf Court." "Where the hell is that?" He picked up his jacket and guided us to the path and back to Central Tower. "A few days away to the south. The night you saw approaches, but we'll make it." "We're going there?" "Yes. It's time you see that your calling does some good in this world, and that you are not a failure." We were nearly inside when he asked, "Did you see any fire in this vision?" "Torchlight, but no fire, not like what I've seen in my other visions." "Why?" "Just a hunch. We can discuss it later." He pressed his hand to my forehead. "You don't feel feverish this time." "Maybe we're all overreacting," I suggested, praying it was true. He fell silent, and I didn't push the issue of what his hunch was. I had enough on my mind right then anyway, like why I'd given in and kissed him like that. I was supposed to be putting distance between us. So much for that genius plan. The feelings I had for him were real and strong, which meant when I did end up dying, the agony he'd go through would be 100 times worse than I first imagined. I would not let him suffer. That kiss would have to be our last kiss. I'd put up walls, make him hate me if I had to, but one way or another I would ensure when my time came Alred didn't miss me. For now, I'd throw all my focus into my visions and finding a way to end the war before I ended up dead like Garrick and all the rest.
Chapter 6. Alred. After 4 long days of travel with a troop of soldiers, once again led by Trollian, we arrived at the small village of Ludland within the realm of the Four-Leaf Court. The trek through the wastelands had been uneventful. Though Nienna had the tome with her, shrunken down to a manageable travel size, so it fit in the leather pouch at her hip, she had no reason to use it. The rush of visions she seemed to have, when first becoming the historian, appeared to be slowing. I hoped they were, for both our sakes. The lack of fighting and visions should have brightened my mood, but it didn't do a damn thing to improve it. The entire journey, Nienna kept her distance from me, again, and if I spoke to her, she would only respond with one-word answers. She chatted with the soldiers and Trollian, but not me. The words she'd said while we'd been in the gardens kept coming back to me. She was trying to save me, but from what, I hadn't been able to figure out. I was the protector, which meant I was meant to keep her safe, not the other way around. "Looks like there's a festival going on," Trollian commented. The main road leading into Ludland was lined with colorful tents selling wares, food, and drinks. Beyond it, the towering oak that stood at the center of the small lake had been decorated with paper lanterns for the festivities. There is, for the patron goddess of Four-Leaf. Madras. I hadn't even realized what time of year it was, I murmured, frowning. This could complicate matters. There are far more elves here than I thought there'd be. I glanced back and ascertained Nienna was in good hands. She was with 2 soldiers, laughing while they joined the celebration. Trollian grunted. "We'll see they're protected. We have the details of the attack, and know where they're going to be coming from. I'll go speak with the elder and let her know of our plans." We'd sent a message ahead of our arrival by Raven, so they would know why a troop of elves was showing up on their doorstep. The plan had been simple enough, but a few adjustments would need to be made to ensure everyone's safety. Trollian strode away, and I was left holding the reins of my horse, torn between going with him or tracking down Nienna. I decided against doing either. The stables weren't far away, and after taking care of my steed, I returned to the village square. Cheerful string music was being played by the musicians, set up on a small wooden stage. Elves danced and twirled around each other, while everyone else mingled, eating and drinking, as they celebrated the love of their goddess. It had been decades since I attended a festival. Back then, I would have been in the thick of the merriment, enjoying the night. Now the noise gave me a headache, and I wanted nothing more than to turn in. I moved through the edge of the crowd. We'd arrived at sundown, and the night was lit with torches, bonfires, and lanterns hanging in the trees and from the porches of houses lining the main road. I caught glimpses of Nienna dancing with the locals. Seeing her laugh and smile was nice for a change. I almost went to her but stopped short. I finally grabbed an ale and took a post under a tree atop a small grassy slope where I had a perfect view of the village square. Trollian joined me not long after, grinning. "We're all set up," he told me. "There are rooms at the tavern for Nienna and you. I'll stay with the men in the meeting hall. No point in camping if we want to keep our presence a secret. They've all changed into less conspicuous clothing. I'd prefer the enemy not to realize we're here. On the day of the attack, the guests and those who live in the outer reaches of the village will be moved to the tavern and out of harm's way. It's the only building large enough to hold everyone." "Solid plan," I murmured. "All right, what's going on with you?" "Nothing." "That's bullshit. You've been quiet since we left Velbam. You didn't have to come here with Nienna. If you're that worried, something's going to go wrong." "No, she needs to be here to see that some good is coming of her calling." "Great, then what's making you look all pissed off?" I drained the rest of my ale, wishing he would give up and go away. Too bad Trollian was stubborn like me, and stood by my side waiting. The 7 have yet to come up with a plan to deal with the fire demon. He shrugged. And you said it yourself, as has Nienna. We're months away from those visions happening, maybe even years. I don't think we are. Why not? Did Nienna see something else? She hadn't, thank the gods, but I was always on edge now, waiting for the next vision that would render her unconscious for hours, maybe even days. I'd considered sneaking the tome away from her before we set out, but if she had a vision while we were gone, she would need it by her side. I'd had hated the tome Garrett kept with him. Likewise, I despised the one tied to Nienna. Burning it crossed my mind, but another one would take its place. The fire, I finally whispered. When she sees it, that's when she ends up screaming and struck with a fever. I doubt that's a coincidence. You think she's connecting to the fire demon? How? I don't know, but if I'm right, that damned cage isn't going to hold him much longer. Did you tell Thalia? I scoffed. She can't do anything without the approval of the entire 7. They're not willing to risk lives to see if the goblins are making a move in the mountains. They can't see they're risking even more lives if they keep turning a blind eye. And even if she believed me, she would have to convince the council and the generals. Quite a few enjoy being in denial of how quickly this war is shifting, and not in our favor. I thought the Protector was supposed to have faith. All I care about is keeping Nienna alive. My chest tightened. I searched the crowd until she came into view. She was dancing with an elf, laughing as he spun her around and around. I took a step forward, had a second thought, shook my head, and made myself relax. You do have it bad. I shot Trollian a look. Have what bad? You like her, and don't try to tell me you don't. I'm not blind. Besides, you're not the only one. You're making less and less sense the more you talk. How much ale have you had? Not enough. He nudged me with his elbow. Why not just admit it? I stiffened, disliking the sight of Nienna dancing with a different elf now. I'm ready to, believe it or not, I admitted, surprised at my words. I had taken what Thalia told me to heart, and, over the last few days of traveling in silence, knew there was no hope of staying away from Nienna. Our connection went beyond the bond of a protector and historian. Whatever she'd done to me, it wasn't about to be undone, and I didn't want it to be. I wanted her. My eyes flicked to Trollian, who was watching me, and I murmured, "Hard to do anything when you're constantly trying to flirt with her." He gave me a sheepish grin. If it makes you feel any better, she never flirted back. What? I pulled out all the stops too, but she's got her sights set on someone else. I assumed it was you. That's what I was talking to her about the other day. We're only friends, which means no one else is vying for her attention. That should make you happy. I crossed my arms, glowering at yet another elf now dancing with Nienna. It's complicated. How? You like her, and she obviously likes you. There are no rules against you two being together. You're not the first one to remind me of that. Then what's the problem? She's the only woman I've ever seen you get this torn up about. I thought by now you would have been a happy couple, driving each other crazy. She's driving me crazy all right, just not in that way. Trollian nodded slowly, but his eyes narrowed, glancing from me to Nienna. Alred, seriously, what's going on with you two? I wish I knew. My eyes followed Nienna, moving away from the elves to grab a mug of ale. Her head turned, and her gaze latched onto mine, finding me without any trouble at all. When she started my way, I considered rushing off, but running wasn't in my nature. Hey, Nienna said when she reached us. You two aren't going to join the festivities? Oh, I am. Stick in the mud over here isn't much for parties. Trollian beamed at me, while I glowered at him. He waved, walking off to join the festival. Nienna took his place, sinking onto the grassy slope overlooking the village square. This is great. They're all so happy. Someone said this was for Madras. She's a goddess, right? Yes, one of the 5 we have. What's she the goddess of? A history lesson of our gods hadn't been how I planned to spend tonight, but at least she was talking to me. I sat down beside her. Madras is a goddess of warriors and lost loves. Really? Why do you sound surprised? Warriors know about lost love more than most. She ran her fingers along the rim of her mug, her green eyes darkening. Guess that's true. In the beginning, it said there were 6 gods, I explained, recalling the story from my childhood. 3 sets of companions. Madras and Nasir were fierce warriors, and the patron deities of the four-leaf court. It said their fighting spirit was poured into the earth, and is crafted into every weapon made of iron. When our races were first starting out, evil, in the form of hideous beasts, roamed Kenzugrod. Madras and Nasir led the charge against them, fighting to make the world safe for elves and goblins to live and grow. Nienna picked a blade of grass and tore it to shreds. Why do I feel like this story doesn't have a happy ending? I debated discontinuing the tale, but found the words pouring out of my mouth anyway. The days turned dark, and the god's existence was threatened by a great tidal wave of shadow that erupted from deep within the earth. The gods, alongside the elves and goblins from the early days, fought a bloody war to defeat it. During the final battle, Nasir was taken captive. He was tortured. By the time Madras rescued him, he'd gone mad. That's awful. According to legend, Madras single-handedly drove the evil back into the earth and sealed it away in the face of her rage. But Nasir was never sane again. He became corrupted, and eventually Madras had to kill the man she loved. My heart grew heavy, remembering why I hated this story so much. A tragic love story, that's what my mother always called it. And now she watches over those who have lost loved ones. I swallowed hard, muttering, those who have lost loved ones they failed to save. Nienna's hands paused their tearing of another blade of grass. Her eyes, that explains why they're so sad in the pictures they have down there. They say if you listen, you can hear her cries of agony when another love is lost. Well, that's not the story I was hoping to hear. Everyone's so happy. I assumed she was the goddess of, I don't know, parties or something. Of home, maybe. All the same, her story's important, I said, gazing over the festivities. Those people aren't merely celebrating her, but also those they've loved and lost. It's better to remember and celebrate than to wallow in misery for the rest of your life. Nienna swiped at her eyes. Her hand shook when she reached for another blade of grass. I fought back a grimace. I didn't mean to upset you. No, it's fine. She twisted the grass and dropped it, hurrying to stand. I think I'm going to turn in for the night. I'll see you in the morning. I stood, catching her hand to stop her from running off. Wait. Alred, please, I'm tired and I want to get some sleep. We need to talk. There's nothing to talk about. That's a damned lie, and you know it. I moved so I stood in front of her. She turned her head. Gently, I turned it right back. Whatever you think you have to do, you don't have to do it. Her face scrunched, tears shimmering in her eyes. Don't. Nienna, I tried, but she backed away, slipping from my grasp. I guess I should have been praying to Madras this whole time, she whispered, and took off down the slope and into the village square. I had no idea what she meant by that. I let her go. Not in the mood to do any more celebrating myself, and wanting to avoid Trollian, I headed to the tavern where my room was right next to Nienna's. At her door I paused, pressing my ear to the wood. Nothing but silence met me. I sighed, ducked into my room, and quietly closed the door. My eyes shot open, looking into the darkness of my room. The village was quiet outside. The festival had ended at some point in the night. Not sure what awoke me, I sat up slowly, scratching the scruff on my face. A cool breeze flowed through the open shutters and across my bare chest. My sleep had been anything but peaceful. I tossed, unable to get comfortable until finally passing out. Was it a nightmare that woke me? I strained to remember anything, but there was just darkness. Throwing the blankets back, I rose, stalking around my small room, while rubbing my hands together to warm them. The fire had gone cold. I had just bent to make a new one, when Nienna's spike of fear shot down my spine. I rushed out of my room to hers, reaching her door in time to hear her shout of panic. I threw open the door to find her thrashing in bed. "Nienna," I whispered, taking hold of her shoulders as I'd done so many times before. "Nienna, wake up, love. It's only a dream." She sucked in a sharp breath and fought against my hold. I shook her. Her eyes opened a second later. She scrambled away until her gaze landed on me. "Alred. Shit, sorry. I didn't mean to wake you up. It's what I'm here for." She shifted away, sitting with her back to the wall. "Thanks for waking me up." "Any time. Want to talk about it?" Her face paled, and she shook her head, sending messy hair falling over her shoulders. "Nope, I'm good. It's fine. Everything's fine." "You really are a terrible liar." She scowled, but the fear remained in her eyes. "I keep seeing the fire. It's all I see now at night. There's no way to stop it. I have to stand there and watch it devour everything before it turns on me." She opened her mouth like she was going to say more, but shook her head instead. I sat on the edge of her bed, holding her hands, when I sensed she was about to start picking her nails. The fire demon is locked in a cage created by the gods. It's not getting out anytime soon. But you think it's going to happen. Her brow drew together when I didn't answer. So much for holding out hope that those visions won't come true. That's awesome, really awesome. There's a chance he won't get out. Now who's the bad liar? There was nothing else I could think to say, so I rose. "I'll let you get back to sleep." I was at the door when she said my name. Her cheeks reddened, and she fiddled with the blanket. Can you stay with me? Just until I fall asleep. That last nightmare, it was a bit much, and I don't think I can shut my eyes if I'm alone." Her eyes darted to my bare chest, her face turning a darker shade of crimson. "If not, though, it's fine. I get it." Unable to say no, I went back to her bed. She scooted over to make room for me. I sat down beside her, keeping my back against the wall. We sat in silence. The only light came from the moons hanging in the black sky. Leaves rustled outside the window, and Nienna flinched with a mumbled curse. "You can get comfortable," I told her. "I'll be right here. I'm fine like this. Lay down and get some sleep. You're safe. I'm not going anywhere." She puffed out her cheeks, then gave in and laid down all the way. "Didn't think this was part of your role as protector. My duty is to take care of you. Sleep." I debated using magic to ensure she rested, but having her ticked off at me tomorrow wasn't something I wanted to deal with when goblins would be attacking soon. I shut my eyes, folded my hands in my lap, and listened to her breathing. I dozed for a bit. A gust of wind made the tavern creak, and she moved closer, pulling me away from the edge of sleep. Wondering what she'd do, I scooted down the wall and drew her closer to my side. She had to be half asleep. Otherwise, I doubted she would have wrapped her arm around my body and rested her cheek on my chest. "Nienna." She replied, her eyes closed. "What are you trying to save me from?" She sighed heavily, her hands curling protectively around me. "A broken heart," she whispered, and I stilled. "Your broken heart when I die. Don't want that." Her words had my arms tightening around her. I kissed the top of her head, but she'd fallen back asleep. She was so worried about what would happen to me if she died, she wasn't willing to let herself be with me. She wasn't going to let herself be happy because of her calling. Her attempts to set me up with other women made sense now, but damned if I was going to be with someone else when the person I wanted was right there in my arms. "She's right," a voice whispered in my mind. "She's going to die, no matter what you do. It's the way of the historian." "I don't care," I murmured to the night. "I'll find a way to save her." And I would, after I convinced her being together was worth the risk of what it might cost me in the end. Nienna had changed something inside me. She broke down walls where I had once been sure I would never fall for anyone. She reminded me, in such little time, there was more to life than our callings. Fear of what the tome and her visions were doing to her grew tenfold within me while I lay there in the dark of night. I couldn't lose her, not after I finally found her. Whatever power made Nienna the next historian did it for a reason. Maybe it wasn't because she was the daughter of Garrick and Millie, a pairing I never thought should happen. Maybe it was because of me. My gut told me we were together for a reason. Nienna murmured in her sleep, her brow furrowing. Gently, I smoothed out the lines, speaking to her quietly in Elvish. She settled, and eventually, sleep came for me, dragging me into the dark world of dreams and possibilities of how our future might play out.
Chapter 7. Nienna. My cheek rested on something warm. I frowned, curious at the dream I must be having. Except I was awake. A quiet male grunt had me opening my eyes to find I was sprawled across a naked chest, marked with scars and tattoos of elvish words trailing up the side. Slowly, I lifted my head to find it was indeed my protector. In my bed. With me. Shirtless. The second I started to move, his arm curled around me, dragging me back to him, his brow crinkling. Breathing him in, I shut my eyes and decided maybe drifting off to sleep for a few more minutes wouldn't be a bad thing. I closed my eyes, and my nightmare rushed to the forefront of my mind. I gasped, shooting upright and holding my hand over my mouth to keep from yelling. There'd been no people dying this time. No, it was worse than that. I had seen a cage deep in the jagged mountains, a cage with bars that weakened before my very eyes. I saw the fire reaching out in the form of a hand, to grab me and tear me apart. Nienna. I hadn't even noticed Alred had sat up, but his arm pulled me into a comforting embrace. Sorry, didn't mean to wake you up again. I don't mind. What did you see? Not a vision, just a freaking nightmare. Talking about it might help, he urged. Keeping my face lowered, not wanting him to see the fear in my eyes, I told him exactly what I had seen. With every word, his grip tightened around me. When he kissed the top of my head, I clung to him, shaking from the abomination which had tried to grab me. A glimpse of the vision I had in the mountains rushed back to me, but I didn't share that part with him. What I saw last night had been a nightmare, nothing more. But a vision of me near that cage? Alred would lose his mind. Hell, I was freaking out enough for the both of us. The fire demon, what if he gets out? I whispered. Even if he does, we have time to stop him. You have nothing to fear from it. Not today. But eventually we'll have to face him, won't we? I sat back to find Alred's face carefully blank, but the gold flecks in his eyes shimmered brightly in a vibrant sea of green. You're worried? I'm always worried when it comes to you. That's my duty, remember? Remembering my own duty meant climbing out of bed and putting space between us once again. Yeah, right. I'm going to get dressed if that's all right. Grab some food downstairs. His eye twitched, but he rose and moved around me to the door. We'll be training today. Really? This can't be like a mini vacation. Not with swords. I don't want you to fall behind on how to handle your visions. Today, you're going to keep working on training your mind. Meditating. You need to control the power, so it doesn't control you. I'll meet you outside after breakfast. He hesitated, his hand on the doorknob, but whatever he wanted to say, he grunted instead and left me alone. God, I was a freaking idiot. Madly, I ran my hands through my hair, stomping around while I tried to understand what occurred last night. He'd come to my room and yanked me from a nightmare. And this morning, I woke practically lying on top of the guy. After he told me the tragic story of Madras and Nasir, all I saw was that becoming our story. I'd be the one dying, leaving him to mourn and pick up the pieces. Unless you're wrong, I told myself, glaring out the window as the village started on a new day. He said he wants you, but that's all from the bond and heat of the moment, and no one falls in love this damned fast. I wrapped my arms around myself, unable to stop the nagging voice in my head telling me I wasn't wrong. No matter what I told myself, these insane feelings for Alred were real. I believed in love at first sight when I was a little kid, but I grew up, and the notion became a fairy tale. I shut my eyes thinking back to the first time I saw Alred on campus, those green eyes piercing straight through me. The first kiss we shared when I was falling apart, I remembered it even now. My lips tingled and I sighed. I was in trouble. Huge heaps of trouble. This connection was what I'd hoped to feel with Phil, but never did. With Alred, there was no searching for it. What I felt for him was on the surface for anyone to see. He already told me what he wanted, and how fiercely he was going to fight for it. The more I denied this crazy love growing between us that made no sense, the more he was going to find a way to prove me wrong. I just knew it. Why couldn't you have been some shallow jackass? I slammed the shutters closed and dressed for the day. No, you had to be the silent, handsome, brooding type who cares about me too damn much. I continued my muttering out the door, and down the steps to the tavern's dining room. It was filled with the soldiers, disguised as villagers, as well as locals mingling and talking about last night. I spotted Trollian and sank into the chair beside him. You look like you had a shitty night, he said with a laugh. Care for some coffee? Thanks. A mug appeared in front of me a minute later. I breathed in the strong aroma. Alred looked like he was in a fantastic mood too. Something happened last night. No, just more nightmares. I spun the mug around, keeping it firmly in my hand so I wouldn't start shredding my nails. Your bright red cheeks would say otherwise, he murmured. I hung my head, wishing I weren't so quick to blush. I don't know what to do, I confessed quietly. What do you mean? About what? Everything. The coffee no longer sounded good, not with my stomach twisted in knots. Trollian rose, nodded at the door. How about we take a walk, yeah? You look like you need a friend to talk to. I kept my mouth shut until we were outside and wandering aimlessly through the village. He's driving me crazy, I ranted. In the beginning, I thought he was some stuck-up asshole who was going to boss me around all the time and be constantly disappointed that I wasn't a younger version of Garrick. Then it turns out he's got this caring side that never quits. He's always there when I need him, and at first I thought it was this bond thing, but now I have no idea what to think. I can't be falling for someone this fast, and he can't, and it doesn't matter what we feel anyway because in the end it's all going to suck. Trollian's brow was practically at his hairline by the time I shut up. Is that all you're worried about? I burst out laughing with him. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to dump that on you. Jurgis is usually who I'd vent to about all this, but he's not here. I don't mind. Why do you think it's going to suck in the end? Anyone can see Alred cares for you, and not simply as your protector. He's never been the jealous type, but when he sees you with other elves, he chuckled, he gets a wee bit moody. He does? Yes. He wants to be in a relationship, and that in itself is a miracle. Alred hasn't let himself get close to anyone. Ever. I know. Jurgis told me the same thing. Said it had something to do with his path in life. Trollian shrugged, guiding us down another road to the edge of the village and the fields of pumpkins and gourds that stretched beyond it. I think he's been scared. We grew up with this war. Watch people lose those they love. After his parents were killed, he told me he never wanted to go through that pain again. I tripped over my feet and cursed. Nienna. Sorry. I tore at my thumbnail, unable to keep walking. That's why I can't be with him. What do you mean? I gave him a pointed look. Ah yes, the fate of the historian. I'm going to die, I whispered furiously. No matter what I do, I'll end up dying in the end because that freaking tome says so. I'm going to abandon him, and then what? Is he supposed to live out his days with a broken heart? I can't leave him behind to suffer like that. So you'd rather have him suffer while you're alive, he countered. He's not suffering now. Isn't he? I scoffed, kicking a pebble off the road and into the fields. No. I mean, if we're not together, we're not suffering. We're not exactly happy either. You know, if he would have given one of those other women a chance. Trollian cut me off with a bark of laughter. You're the one that was trying to set him up? Nienna, come on. What? I want him to be happy. My job is to end the war and restore balance. That means making sure everyone finds happiness. I hoped he would find it with someone else, and then when I bite the dust he won't miss me. It's a solid plan. It's a shit plan is what it is. I glowered, hating to admit he was right. My shoulders sagged and he nudged me, getting us walking again. Fine, it was a bad idea. It's not like it worked anyway. Why would it? You said it yourself. You love him and he loves you. But that's not possible. I once heard Garrick talk about the day he met Millie, he said softly, a smile on his face. He said he knew he loved her from the second their eyes met. Sometimes you just know. Sometimes your souls connect instantly, and there's nothing you can do to change that. What my parents had was true love. Back then, I thought Mom had been in love with an idea of Garrick the hero. Now, I understood it was love for the elf who had to leave her behind. A true love that never faded or died, even when they were apart. We're in the middle of a war. I should be worried about what's coming instead of love. Trollian gently tugged me to a stop, his sea blue eyes filled with hope. If we're not thinking about love and happiness, then what's the point of fighting? You shouldn't waste any more time trying to run from what you feel. Are you saying we should enjoy every second we have together before I die? His lips thinned, but he nodded. You're lucky enough to have found someone to love, so yeah, that's what I'm saying. This is still so crazy to me. A couple of months ago, I was going about my job at the library. My life was quiet, and now I'm in the middle of a war in a world I had no idea existed. Crazy isn't always a bad thing. No, it's not. I wasn't sure I could go running up to Alred and throw myself in his arms. I wanted to, badly, but a tiny part of me held back from giving in. I need you to do something for me, I told Trollian, squeezing his hand. You're his friend and I know you're there for him, but when it happens I stumbled over my words, when it's my time to go, you'll take care of him, right? You'll make sure he doesn't lose it completely? It might not come to that. But if it does, you'll take care of him. Promise me. He sighed and nodded, then hugged me. I will. I swear to. Yeah, so I guess I should get back. Supposed to be doing some mental training today, I muttered, shoving my hands in my pockets. I'll see you later. I returned to the center of the village to find Alred. The whole way there, I worried I wasn't doing the right thing. As soon as I saw him, I'd tell him. I'd flat out say it and deal with the consequences. Where have you been? My head shot up to find Alred standing outside the tavern. I went for a walk. He grunted and motioned for me to follow him. Let's get started if you're finally ready. I readied the words I wanted to say to him, but they wouldn't come out. Fear of what I'd be putting him through stopped me. I swallowed them down, shoving my feelings for him as far down as they could go. You all right? Huh? Yeah, great, why? His expression turned curious, then he pointed to a small grassy area beneath two large trees. Their branches hung low, creating a hidden little area away from the village. Figured this would be a good place for you to settle your mind. I know you sit beneath the willows when you train with Thalia and Jurgis. Hasn't exactly worked with them for some reason. Maybe a change of scenery will help. How would you do it? He shot me an odd look. I clarified, I mean, if you were the one training me, what would you say? The rest of your lectures seem to work for me. Eventually. His eyes narrowed a hint. You need to meditate. Learn to center yourself, ground your mind in the here and now. If you can train your mind to be in a more aware and grounded state, you'll learn to control the visions instead of the visions controlling you. I sat down cross-legged. You don't sound very convincing. He leaned against the tree nearby. I'm not exactly qualified to be giving you advice on this matter. And I sound fine. No, you don't think this is going to work because nothing about my visions are normal. Just close your eyes, he ordered, his voice taking on the hard tone he used during our sword training sessions. I did as he said, and waited for him to give me more instruction. He said nothing. After 30 seconds of listening to the distant sounds coming from the village, and the leaves rustling in the branches overhead, I peeked through squinted eyes to find him watching me. I said, close your eyes. And then what? You didn't say what to do after that. You'll know what to do. It's called instinct, something I'm continually reminding you to listen to. Close your eyes and focus on grounding yourself, becoming aware of what's around you. I grunted, aggravated. Why do you all think I can do that so easily? How about you take my advice and stop doubting yourself? Shut your eyes. I closed them and, once again, waited for him to give me any sort of instruction. When he remained silent, I gave up on his saying anything and let my mind drift. It wasn't long before I was back to contemplating my feelings for Alred and what they meant. The times we kissed played back for me like a movie, and I let out a shaky breath, unable to stop the rush of emotions each memory brought to life. The breeze blew through my hair, loosening it from the bun I'd put it in, and tickled my cheeks. Alred was close by. I sensed his watchful gaze and I grinned. Bark breaking on the tree told me he shifted his position, but my eyelids were too heavy to open. My mind wandered more, wondering what would happen if I gave in and let myself be with him. The images in my mind shifted away from what we shared, to the darkness caused by the war. I flinched when the echo of pain screams flowed through my thoughts. I didn't want to see the destruction left behind by the goblins, but I was dragged right into the thick of it, forced to watch my past visions play out repeatedly. I tensed, trying to open my eyes, but they refused to obey. Alred called my name, but he sounded so far away now. I was lost in a sea of agony when a sudden hush fell. I stood in a cavern. Ahead of me was a cage. The bars shimmered violet and blue, like they were electrified. Not wanting to, I walked closer, reaching out my hand for the bars. Something massive stirred in the darkness. A pair of flaming crimson eyes flickered to life, narrowing at the sight of me. Soon, I heard myself say, but my voice was off. Soon, my love, you'll be free. The beast within the cage burst to life, its body of twisting flames burned my skin. I tried to scream but found myself smiling instead, as if I was happy to be there dying. Hands grabbed hold of my shoulders and yanked me away. My vision blurred for a moment. When it cleared, I wasn't back beneath the trees with Alred. I stood in a strangely lit void with Garrick. I don't have much time, he said urgently. Something's wrong. With me? Yeah, I'm figuring that out. No, not with you. With the calling. Powers have shifted, and whatever is at work is dangerous. You must be careful. You have to find a way to stop the visions. Stop them? What are you talking about? I thought this was my destiny. The last page. You need the last page. The words were lost to me in death, but now I remember them. You need to see that page. He glanced around as the light dimmed. I'm sorry, Nienna, but this isn't the destiny you were meant to have. You have to fix it before it's too late. Find the page. I reached for him, but my hand passed through his body. He disappeared. I fell backward into nothingness. My back hit the ground, and I groaned from the impact. Ow. Nienna? Shit, I think she's finally out of it. Nienna, can you hear me? Yeah, stop yelling. I opened my eyes to find Alred and Trollian watching me. What? I was only doing what you told me to do. It's been 8 hours, Alred muttered. What? I sat up and my head spun. Damn. What happened? I was hoping you could tell me. You weren't answering me. What were you seeing? Holding my hand to my head, I shut my eyes, but Alred shook my shoulder. What? Keep your damned eyes open. Fine, they're open. My back ached, as did my legs. I stretched the best I could, muttering more curses at how stiff I was. I saw Garrick. He said something's wrong with the calling. He mentioned the last page. Then he disappeared, and before that, I didn't want to admit what I'd seen myself doing. Nienna? The fire demon had been in that cage, and I'd been talking to it. I'd been about to let it out. If I told Alred, he'd think I had lost it. Finding the words proved difficult, and I was going to simply say I saw all my past visions when I caught sight of the moons rising into the sky over Alred's shoulder. Using his shoulders to push myself up, I scrambled to my feet, searching for the red star on the horizon. "It's tonight," I whispered. "Alred." He followed my gaze, grabbed hold of my hand, and dragged me back to the village square. Trollian whistled, and the soldiers were quick to take their places, making ready for the ambush. I wasn't sure it was possible to catch the enemy off guard. The goblins could already have eyes on the place, but there was no time to change the plan now. Luckily, the whole village had turned out to celebrate, and the elves were mostly together already. Alred ushered people into the tavern, trying to put me inside too. "No, if you're out here, I'm staying too," I argued. "You're not ready for a fight, not like this." "Maybe not, but I'm staying out here with you." His eye twitched, but he reached for the dagger at his hip and handed it over. "You stay behind me, and if I tell you to go inside and bar the door, then you do it. No arguing." The dagger was heavy in my hand, but I steeled my nerves, picturing Garrick to give me courage. "Yeah, got it." He kept his sword sheathed under his coat, and meandered into the road. Trollian and the soldiers dressed to look like villagers were the only ones out. Archers would be on the roofs by now. When a whistle sounded, my heart raced. The goblins had been spotted moving toward the village. Alred and Trollian stood a few yards away, facing the north. I stepped further from the tavern door. The breeze that had been blowing died down completely. The chirping crickets fell silent, along with the birds I'd heard twittering a few moments ago. A hush fell over the village. Inside the tavern, a baby cried, and someone quickly shushed it. The festive mood of last night was gone, as if it hadn't happened at all. Alred glanced over his shoulder at me, nodding. I gripped the dagger, waiting. A loud horn blew in the distance. I jumped. A single flaming arrow landed in the village square. Alred grabbed Trollian, pulling him away seconds before the arrow exploded. The force of the blast threw me into the tavern door with a grunt. I slid to the ground, shaking my head. Shouts resounded as the goblins attacked, but everything was muffled. Alred appeared at my side, dragging me to my feet. "Get inside," he ordered. "Do it." Another horn blared, and I rushed inside the tavern. I bolted the door behind me, turning to face the hiding elves. I wanted to assure them Alred and Trollian had the fight under control, but I had no way of knowing if that was true. My thoughts slipped to Garrick, and what he'd do in this situation. I put on a brave smile, and held up my hands, trying to calm everyone. "We're going to be fine," I assured them. "No one's going to die tonight." "That's what you saw?" a young female elf asked to my right. "Yeah, it is," I lied, because I honestly had no idea who or how many were going to perish this night. I didn't get to see the outcomes of these attacks, only the attacks themselves. I squeezed her trembling hand. "Everyone stay calm, and we'll get through this." Shouts and horns thundered outside. I longed to open it and check on Alred, but didn't dare. I had no idea how many goblins were attacking, and prayed to the only goddess I knew in these parts to keep them all safe. Madras was the goddess of warriors, after all. Surely she'd hear me. "He has to be okay," I whispered, pressing my hand to the door. "He has to be." Listening to the fight, and not being able to see it, was worse than witnessing one of my visions. The windows had been shuttered, and all I could do was stand there and listen with everyone else. Glass shattered, and I stumbled away. The windows were broken, and something beat at the feeble barriers between the enemy and us. They weren't going to hold. Two elves, the only warriors in this village, moved forward, yelling at everyone else to head upstairs. I ushered them to the steps, while the shutters quickly turning to splinters. The last woman was climbing to the second floor, when another explosion rocked the tavern, sending me crashing to my knees with a yelp. Wood and glass fell around me. I lifted my head, gazing at where the front of the tavern once stood. Through the dust, hulking shadows appeared, but the warriors were on the floor, not moving. I squared my shoulders, planting myself at the bottom of the steps. Two tall goblins stormed through the opening, screeching in delight when they heard the panicked screams of the innocents behind me. Each held a jagged-edged sword in his hand, and I gulped at the blood dripping from the steel. They spoke to each other in Goblin, cackling when they nodded at me. The one on the right, a scar running down his face, lifted his sword, charging forward. Every lesson Alred instilled in me rushed to the forefront of my mind. I ducked beneath the wide swing of the blade and slashed at his side. He snarled, spinning around to attack again. I was half his size, and I used it to my advantage, staying out of reach of that damned sword trying to slice me in half. Adrenaline flooded my body. All those times Alred told me to stop holding back, I'd never listened. Now I did, and I moved faster than I thought I could, letting instinct take over. The goblin stomped its foot, snatching at me. I stabbed his outstretched arm. He shouted, enraged, and moved in to tackle me. I slid to the right and took a swipe at his exposed back. He dropped to one knee, and suddenly another elf was there with a chair. He smashed it over the goblin's head. More villagers rushed down the steps to help, and soon the goblin went still. "You elvish bitch." "Shit. I forgot about the other goblin." I spun around, raising the dagger to attack, but he had his hand around my throat. I stabbed his arm. The blade embedded in the bone, and I couldn't free it. Black spots filled my vision. My feeble punches and kicks were useless. Great, this was perfect. I was going to die after all, and without telling Alred how I felt. Maybe it was for the best. My body weakened, and I waited for the end to come.
Chapter 8. Alred. The goblin's head fell to the ground, his lips frozen in a snarl. I kicked the body aside and spun around. Trollian was further down the road, holding his own against two more goblins. The archers made quick work of those not engaged by the soldiers. The explosives attached to their arrows was a new tactic employed by the goblins, and was unexpected, but the fight wasn't going to last much longer. I wiped the blade of my sword on my coat sleeve, and turned to the tavern as a fire arrow landed on its doorstep. Nienna. I ran but didn't get there in time. The arrow exploded, throwing me clear across the dirt road and through the window of another building. Glass rained down around me. I used the wall to drag myself back up, shaking glass shards from my hair. Screams came from the tavern, and a raw burst of fear that wasn't mine had me doubling over. Staggering through the mess, I entered the tavern. Another rush of fear and pain had me grabbing hold of the doorframe to keep myself upright. A second later, it dulled, and I strained to see through the thick smoke from the latest blast. A goblin snarled, and a body was tossed out of the tavern. It rolled, and the blondish red head of hair had me sprinting toward her. Nienna. I tapped her cheeks. She coughed and gasped, clutching at her throat. She winced when I set her up. I tried to ask her what happened, but she pointed behind me and yelled. I brought my sword up in time to catch the blade of the goblin. Yelling at Nienna to move, I shoved the beast back and attacked. In 4 swift moves I had him disarmed, and my blade through his chest. The killing blow drove him to his knees. He collapsed when I pulled my sword free. A scuffle sounded behind me, and Nienna shouted. I readied my blade to attack again, but she beat me to it. She had the dagger shoved up and under the goblin's ribs by the time I turned. He twitched and stumbled back. Nienna gasped and glanced at her side. Too late, I spotted the dagger in the goblin's hand, soaked in Nienna's blood. She blinked, surprised, glancing at her side. Blood bloomed through her shirt and she fell. I caught her in my arms and laid her on the ground. It's all right, you're going to be fine, I muttered, pressing my hands to her side. My hands glowed while I used magic to stem the blood pouring out of her body. Keep your eyes open. Nienna, don't you dare close those eyes. Her lips twitched, Always so bossy. Her voice was rough, and talking seemed to cause her pain. I checked the wound, cursing under my breath. Pressing my hands to it harder made her cry out, but I didn't have a choice. I had to slow the bleeding. My panic was making my magic flicker in and out, and the glow faded from my hands. Damn it. What the hell were you thinking? He was trying to stab you, she rasped, her voice weakening. I saved you. It's not your job to protect me. That's what people do when? Her head sank to the ground. Nienna. I need a healer. Trollian shouted one was coming. I kept my hands to Nienna's wound, willing her to open her eyes and look at me, to say something, anything. Her blood wet the dirt beneath her. Too much blood. You don't get to leave me yet, I whispered. The healer, an older elven woman with long silver hair, arrived and told me to take Nienna to her home. With Trollian keeping the pressure on her wound, I carried Nienna through the village and to the healer's house. I placed her on a bed and stepped back to let the woman work, my eyes never leaving Nienna's face. How many dead? I asked Trollian. 4. 3 soldiers. 1 villager. A few more are wounded, but they'll make it. We were lucky. Based on her vision, I feared it'd be more. And the goblins? Dead, every last one. I already sent scouts to check the woods for spies. He squeezed my shoulder. She'll make it. She's strong. I nodded, listening to his steps as he exited the house. A tense half-hour later, and the healer backed away from the bed, washing her hands in the sink set in the wall. She's going to make it, protector, she assured me with a kind smile. Now all she needs is rest. You're more than welcome to wait here with her. I have to see to the other wounded. I thanked her, dragged a chair to Nienna's bedside, and sank onto it. Letting out a shaky breath, I took hold of her hand, squeezing it in hopes she'd know I was beside her. My leg bounced, my impatience growing for her to wake up. I wasn't sure how much time had passed when she cringed, shifting on the bed. Her eyes fluttered open. I let out a sigh of relief. Hey, I said when she turned her head. Oh good, I'm alive, she murmured, voice still raspy. I scowled. Get that look off your face. I saved your ass. She winced, rubbing her sore neck. Stop talking. You're going to hurt yourself more. And my ass didn't need saving, I snapped. Not what I saw. She tried to sit up, but I quickly pushed her back down. You are not leaving this bed until the healer says so. You lost a lot of blood. I grit my teeth at the sight of her bloody shirt, shoved out of the way so the healer could take care of the wound. Gods, Nienna, don't ever do that shit again. You're the one that trained me to fight, she pointed out. What's the goal of the training if I don't get to use it? She gingerly touched her neck, cursing about goblins trying to strangle her. My anger spiked. I grunted, pushing away from the bed to prowl around the room. Really, I'm okay. It's bad enough I have to watch you suffer from every damn vision you have, but now you're throwing yourself at goblins. And getting stabbed. Running my hands madly through my hair, I prayed for control, but the anger rushing through my veins like fire was too much. Do you have any idea what you put me through? Do you have any idea what you do to me every day? I whirled around to see her eyes overflowing with regret and confusion. Tears shimmered. I stomped back to her bedside, reaching for her hand. She pulled it away, shaking her head. You don't understand, she whispered on a breath. A single tear slipped down her cheek, and I longed to wipe it away. I want to be with you. I've wanted it since I first saw you. You do? She nodded, sniffing and shoving her hair out of her face. But I can't. Why the hell not? I asked, exasperated. This time when I took her hand, she let me. Talk to me, please. What are you so afraid of? Hurting you, she confessed, lifting her eyes to look into mine. I blinked, confused. How are you going to hurt me? Really? I'm going to die, remember. It's all part of my calling. That stupid tome is going to tell me when I'm going to die, and I can't leave you alone with a broken heart. I won't. I saw what it did to my mom after Garrick died. I can't do that to you. She was crying now, trying to pull away from me, but I held on tighter. I want you to have a chance to be happy. You deserve that, but if you're with me and it's my time, I won't be the reason you fall apart. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I cupped her face, wiping away the tears as they fell. I'm not going to let you die, you hear me? You won't have a choice. Neither of us will. I don't care what the tome says, or the past historians, or the gods. I am not going to let anything take you from me. I kissed her. And I will suffer 100 broken hearts if it means I get to spend my life with you. She laughed, kissing me back. I held her close, careful of her wound, and wondered how the hell I was going to keep that promise. The tome always chose the fate of the historian. That was how it had been since the beginning. There had to be a way to break the connection, to stop her from being the historian. All I had to do was figure it out before it was too late. The tome was currently filled with hundreds of blank pages. I had time, unless her visions picked up again. But as long as there were blank pages in the tome, I had a chance to save her. Does this mean we're a thing now? She mused, a smile in her words. Yes, we're a thing, I replied, kissing the top of her head, if you stop trying to push me away. Can you blame me? No, but no more, all right? Deal. She leaned back, her gaze searching. This isn't weird for you. Like we're moving too fast. Surprisingly, no, not in the least. It feels right. Guess I was waiting for you all this time. She nudged me gently. You're such a teddy bear under that brooding exterior of yours. Don't tell anyone. I pressed my lips to hers. Get some rest. I'll be here when you wake up. I'm not tired, she insisted. This time I did use my magic. I laid my palm on her forehead, telling her to rest. A few seconds later, she snored quietly. I situated her in the bed, tucked her in with a blanket, and left the house. A soldier stood outside the door, and I left him with orders to keep an eye on Nienna for me. It might have been the dead of night, but the whole village was awake. I dove in to offer my help, carrying the dead goblins to a pile to be burned. Once they were removed, I cleaned up debris left over from the attack and checked in with Trollian. After giving him an update on Nienna, I told him I was going to take a walk to clear my head. Everything all right with you too? He asked. As long as I ensure that Tome doesn't kill her, yes, we're great. There has to be a way to stop that from being her fate. I'll help you, and I'm sure Jurgis will too. He gave me a solemn look. We won't let her die. I appreciated his words, but they were of little comfort. I walked away, heading for the edge of the village and the woods beyond. The scouts had reported back, saying the area was clear. The moons were bright enough to give me light to see. I wandered, ducking under low-hanging branches and moving around shrubs heavy with violet and red berries. The trees grew closer together the further I walked. I came across a well-worn path leading to a small clearing. A fire crackled at the center of it, and sitting around it were 4 elves. They raised their heads as I approached. Sorry, didn't mean to startle you, I told them when one of the elves reached for a sword resting nearby. Were they from the village? What were they doing all the way out here? Who are you? The elf with the sword asked sharply. Alred Lightvale. Ah, the protector. I told you it was him, the elven woman with long curly bluish-black hair said. Her vibrant blue eyes stood out from her dark skin, and she motioned me forward. Come join us at our fire, Alred Lightvale. I hesitated, but a strange tugging in my stomach had me leaving the darkness of the trees to step into the light of the fire. The woman who spoke sat beside an elf with gold eyes. He bowed in greeting. To my right sat the elf with the sword, and another woman smiled at me as I took a seat on another fallen log. I didn't catch your names, I said, realizing too late I'd left my sword back at the village. There's no need for names or weapons, the woman assured me as if reading my mind. Not this night. We wish only to speak to you. Speak to me about what? Are you from the village? Their dress wasn't anything like what the locals wore. The men sported armored chestplates and leathers, while the women had flowing gowns that shimmered and shifted colors in the flickering firelight. Who are you? All that matters is you listen to us now, the man to my right stated. Nienna Havard is in trouble. What? How do you know that? I snapped. He is a spirited one, the other woman said with a grin. And strong. But is he strong enough? I shook my head at the question from the elf, who studied me through narrowed silver eyes. I'm not going to let you anywhere near Nienna. If you think for 1 second you'll get past me, I swear to the gods I'll make you pay. The four burst into laughter. I frowned. What the hell was going on? The longer I looked at them, the more I recognized their faces. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and blinked a few more times. The truth of who sat in front of me hit me like a punch to the gut, and I cursed. A dream. This is a damn dream, I muttered. Dream or not, we're here, and as we said, we need to speak with you about Nienna. Amra. That was Amra, one of the 5 gods speaking to me. Gulping, my gaze flicked to the elf beside her. Elduin, her companion. Across the fire from them sat Phelan and her partner Neldor. I pinched my arm, and when it hurt, I blanched. This was real. Are you going to pass out, or can we continue? Neldor asked. If you're here about Nienna, then this is about her visions, isn't it? The smiles faded from their faces. I'm afraid it is, Amra replied. The world has shifted even more. I know you've felt it, Protector. I have, but what does that have to do with Nienna? The deities exchanged concerned looks. I'm afraid that fault lies with us, Elduin stated solemnly. The war is not what it seems. Never was. There's a force at work, even we did not foresee it, not until it was too late. The visions Nienna had, the ones of the far future, they're of the end, Amra added. The end of what? The war in Kenzughrot as we know it. Amra rose, pacing around the fire. With a flick of her wrist, the flames morphed into the face of the 5th god, absent from this gathering. Madras has betrayed us. How? There is much that has been lost over the centuries, she went on. Parts of our history that have been forgotten. I'm afraid our mistakes are going to cost us all in the end, and the cost is more than any of us can pay. If she betrayed you, why not take care of it yourselves? I waved my hand at them. You outnumber her. In body, yes, but not in power, Neldor uttered angrily. Sadly, out of all of us, Madras is the most celebrated of our family. During a time of war, it's her your kin pray to keep them safe on the battlefield and bring their loved ones home. Those prayers. That is power to us, power that should be used to answer those prayers and watch over our people. Instead, she has held on to it, Phelan whispered. And between the hoarded power and her fury, she has grown too strong for us to stop. What does your mistake have to do with Nienna? I demanded, on my feet now. We don't know her plans, but we believe it has to do with Nasir. My mind reeled, failing to keep up with the information they threw at me. He died, I said quietly. All the stories say so. And that is where the lost history comes into play. Amra sighed, manipulating the fire again. The images shifted until another face appeared, that of Nasir. He went mad, but Madras couldn't bear to kill him no matter how much we implored. Instead, she begged us to imprison him until she could find a way to save him. For thousands of years, he's been kept in a cage with only his madness to keep him company. Pieces of a puzzle I hadn't realized I was trying to solve fell into place, one after the other. I backed away from the fire, shaking my head. No, that can't be right. You're saying the fire demon Nienna keeps seeing is Nasir? Yes, Amra said simply. The fevers and the fits, it's all tied back to him. How? Why is she seeing him? Because it's the future for our world, unless we can find a way to change it, Neldor told me. We've tried to find Madras, but she's too strong. You lost her, I shouted. My fear for Nienna warred with my anger at them. That's perfect. Running a hand down my face, I turned my back on the gods, not fully believing I was having this conversation with them. She's out there somewhere, and what? Nienna's seeing what happens after she releases Nasir. Why hasn't she let him out yet? What's she waiting for? I asked, whirling around. We don't know, but Amra said. What we do know is that the dark magic the goblins used over the years, the same magic that corrupted the land, has weakened the power of the cage. She's biding her time, Elduin added. And our fear is Nienna will play a key part in her plans. My thoughts flashed to Nienna, currently lying in the healer's house, recovering from a grievous injury. You're telling me not only do I have to worry about goblins kidnapping her or killing her, I now have to watch out for a mad goddess who's coming after her. Using her somehow. If you can't stop a goddess, I surely can't. Not alone, no, Neldor said, and came toward me. But you're not alone. He lifted his sheathed sword, offering it to me. This blade has been imbued with our very essence. It has the power to kill a god, but you must only use it against Madras. If you draw it before you're ready to kill her, the power will diminish. Clenching my jaw in apprehension, I took the sword. The pommel was black and silver, entwined with vines of sapphires. It was heavier than I anticipated, but perfectly balanced in my grip. You expect me to, what, kill her when she shows her face to come after Nienna? Just like that? I wish we could tell you more, Phelan said, standing by Neldor's side. But we have shared all we know. The elves won't be enough to stop Nasir if he's released, Elduin warned, joining them. You expect the goblins to help us. Have you not been watching the war, currently ravishing the lands? We have, but the war was not started by them. At least, not entirely. I pondered Amra's words, lowering my head as another piece fell perfectly into place. Madras started it. It's why the goblins gained so much ground in the beginning. Our greatest regret, Amra said. When we realized what she'd done, it was too late. We had enough power to do one last thing for your kin. Elduin took her hand, grief in his gaze. The historian and the protector, I whispered. All these years, why didn't you show yourself to another protector? To the seven. Hell, to anyone? We could have stopped Madras centuries ago and saved countless lives. What were you waiting for? I shouted, unable to hold back my anger. Time passes differently for us, Phelan said, her green eyes glowing softly. And now, our time is coming to an end. We have used what power was left, searching for Madras and keeping Nasir's cage intact. We can do no more. It's what she's been waiting for all this time. Why her plans weren't shown to any historian until now. I processed their words, my heart growing heavy with sorrow. You're dying. The four nodded. I shook my head, stubbornly holding the sword out to Neldor. No, I don't accept this. I can't. You are gods. You can't die. Everything dies in time. Amra came to me, pushing the sword toward my chest. She pressed her hand to my cheek and kissed my forehead. A rush of warmth shot through me, a sign of her blessing. Her smile was melancholy. We were meant to leave this world together, the six of us, but even we can't predict where destiny will lead us. The fate of Kenzugrot falls to you, Alred Lightvale. I'm only a protector. An elf, I murmured. I have no power. You have far more than you know. She pressed her hand to my chest. Believe in yourself and Nienna. Together, you two will save everyone. At what cost? I asked roughly. I can't lose her. Then stop Madras, and you won't. I wanted to keep arguing, but she pressed her finger to my forehead. I jerked upright. My head throbbed. I reached for my temple, blinked, and found I was back in the home of the healer, sitting beside Nienna's bedside. She was still sleeping soundly. Dream, I whispered, shaking my head until that made it hurt more. All a dream. Sunlight shone through the window, and I yawned, wondering how late it was. I rose to my feet. Something clanked to the floor beside my chair. The sight of the sapphire pommel of Neldor's sword made me freeze. With a shaking hand, I picked it up. The blade was solid, the weight familiar. Several curses fell from my mouth. I leaned the sword against my chair and opened the door. I just opened my mouth to yell for Trollian when Nienna screamed. I twisted around. Her back arched off the bed. Her hands gripped the mattress's edge until her knuckles turned white. She screamed again. I rushed to grab her shoulder to stop her from flinging herself off the bed or tearing open her wound. Trollian and the healer rushed through the door, with 2 more elves behind them. Amongst the screaming and pained cries coming from Nienna, I picked up one word that shot a chill down my spine. Madras. The god's message echoed in my mind. I held Nienna's face firmly, kissing her forehead. "I'm right here," I whispered. "I'm right here. You're safe and you're with me. Whatever you're seeing, it's not real. Come back to me, Nienna. Come back." Her body settled. She frowned. "Alred," she sighed. "Right here, love." I found her hand, squeezing it, using a bit more magic to help her relax. "Sleep." She breathed in deep and let it out, relaxing fully. I pressed my forehead to hers, wishing more than anything the last few hours hadn't happened. "Alred, where did you get that sword?" Trollian asked. Not trusting myself to speak quite yet, I motioned for him to wait outside for me. He gave me a worried frown but did as I asked. The healer checked Nienna's wound, said she needed to clean and bandage it again. I kissed Nienna and backed away, picked up the sword and carried it outside. I stormed away from the healer's home to the edge of the woods, with Trollian right behind me. Once we were out of sight, I leaned the sword against a tree, whirled around, and with a furious shout punched the trunk of another tree. The jarring pain told me this was real. I drew my fist back to do it again, but Trollian lunged forward, shoving me away from the tree. "Are you insane? What are you doing trying to break your hand?" he scolded. "What's gotten into you? Is this about Nienna getting hurt? She's going to be fine." "No, she's not," I ranted. "She's never going to be safe again." "What are you talking about?" I prowled around the trees like a feral animal, needing to hit something, break something. My blood was on fire, and all I could think about was Nienna dying, because I wasn't going to be able to save her from a goddess gone mad. Finally, I'd found where I was meant to be and who I was meant to be with, and she was going to be stolen from me. "Alred," Trollian snapped, moving into my path. "Talk to me. What is going on?" "The gods came to me last night." "They what? You're serious?" "Yes, and they told me of Nienna's visions and her fate." It felt like someone had reached a hand into my chest and twisted my heart. I sank to my knees in the dirt and leaves, shaking my head. I swore I'd find a way to save her, and now I'm going to watch her die. What am I going to do? Tell me that. Trollian's brow furrowed in confusion. He knelt in front of me, holding my shoulders. "Start at the beginning. Tell me everything. What exactly did the gods tell you?" "Too damn much." I fumbled for his arms, an image of Nienna dying appearing in my mind's eye. "That the war isn't what we think. Nothing is, and Nienna's going to pay the price for their failure." I fell forward, resting my head on my friend's shoulder. Nienna couldn't find out, not about this. It would get her killed faster. No matter what came next, I had to hide the truth from her. It was for her own good. That, and I knew the look of disappointment in her eyes at my failure would kill me faster than any god's wrath.
Chapter 9. Nienna. I came to groggy and confused. The room I was in wasn't familiar, and my side hurt every time I moved even a little. My mouth was dry and my limbs were stiff, as if I'd been lying down for days. Bits and pieces came back to me in random snippets the longer I was awake. Goblins had attacked. I'd been at the tavern, and there was an explosion, maybe? I opened my mouth to say something, but the words were hoarse and my throat hurt. My skin there was tender when I touched it. I wasn't sure why until the goblin's snarling face flooded my mind. Right, I'd been nearly strangled to death. Sitting up took most of the energy I had, and I paused to catch my breath. The pain at my side intensified, and carefully I lifted my shirt, crusty with blood, to find heavy bandaging wrapped around my torso. What the hell? More of the fight came back to me when I shut my eyes. Alred had been there. He killed the goblin, but another had snuck up behind him. I'd attacked it and he stabbed me. Pressing one hand to my aching side, I slid off the bed to the floor, my knees buckling instantly. Using the bed, I hauled myself upright and inched to the door by the windows. From the herbs hanging around the ceiling to dry, and the table loaded with bandages, linens, and bottles, I assumed I was at the home of a healer. I wondered how many others died in the attack, then pushed open the door. I'd made it 2 steps outside when my strength gave out. I faltered. "Damn it," a male voice grunted from beside me, catching me in his arms. "What are you doing?" I turned to find Alred's eyes narrowed and his brow wrinkled with worry. I sighed, relieved to see him okay, and kissed him. He returned the gesture, scooping me into his arms. "You shouldn't be up yet. I needed to find you." "Did you have a vision?" "No, I just woke up and wasn't sure about how the fight ended, except that I was stabbed and we talked and yeah. That's about it." He didn't carry me back inside, but instead took me to a bench outside the house. The fresh air was soothing against my face. I sighed, taking in the sunlight. How long was I out? He knelt on the ground in front of me, holding my hands. 4 days. What? You lost a lot of blood, and you went into a convulsion not long after, but I'm not sure what you saw. His eye twitched, and he glanced away for a split second. Then his gaze latched onto mine, and he smiled softly. You scared the shit out of me. Don't ever do that again, understand? Never. What? Get stabbed while saving your ass? I teased, trying to lighten the mood, but his eyes darkened, and he squeezed my hands harder. Hey, it's okay. I'm alive. He grunted again, and his body radiated tension. Alred, seriously, what happened after I was stabbed? I ran my fingers through his hair, willing him to talk to me. Instead he turned, kissing my palm. Nothing of importance. We burned the goblins, took care of our dead and wounded. Luckily, they were few. And now that you're awake, I'll make sure we're ready to leave tomorrow. I want you back in Velbem, where it's safe. Hopefully. Safe? Are there more goblins coming? I didn't see anything. Not goblins. Then what? The gold in his eyes flared for a second. He was hiding something. Whatever it was, had him more worried than I'd ever seen him. He kissed the top of my head, said I needed to rest until we left in the morning, and hurried away. The elderly healer noticed I was up and about, and checked my wound. She said it was healing, but the next few days would be rough, and to take it as easy as I could. After I was freshly bandaged, I slowly made my way to the tavern and up to my room to find a clean shirt. The tome perched on the table by the bed. I strained to recall the vision I'd had, but nothing came to mind. If it were important, hopefully, I'd remember before too long. Changing was a chore which had me cursing, unable to move like I needed to in order to take off my shirt. Lifting my left arm too high tugged the wound, so I gave up after 10 minutes. A knock came at my door, and I opened it to find Alred there. Heard your cursing. Need some help? He asked, smiling in amusement. I rolled my eyes. If you don't mind. What are you trying to do? Put on a clean shirt. I tried to lift my left arm again but winced and let it fall. This is ridiculous. You don't want to keep this shirt, do you? He nodded at the one I had on. No. It's already torn and doubt I'll get the blood stain out. May I? His voice was rough. Heat rushed through me when he moved closer and took the hem of my shirt in his hands. The leather corset I'd been wearing during the fight was gone when I'd woken up, probably trashed. My breath caught, but I nodded. Alred took hold of the shirt. With one hard tug, the fabric ripped, and he shredded it all the way up, keeping his eyes on mine the whole time. Belatedly, I remembered I wore nothing underneath and turned my back to him. When he worked the ruined shirt over my shoulders, my eyes slipped closed at the feel of his calloused fingers on my arms. The shirt fell away, and he reached for the clean one I'd laid on the bed. Now that I'd given in to the rush of emotions I had for Alred, the worry holding me back before was gone. The reality of how close I'd come to dying hit me. I spun around, grabbed him by his shirt and dragged him to me. The clean shirt fell to the floor and his hands pressed against my bare back, holding me tightly against his chest. We moved across the room, locked in a passionate kiss until my back bumped the wall. I nipped his lip, and he grunted, deepening the kiss until his hands slid down my back to my hips, brushing the bandaging along the way. With a sigh he drew back, leaving me with a sweet kiss to my forehead. "I'm fine," I assured him, but his lips thinned and he shook his head. "You need time to heal." He cupped my cheek, kissing me again, but it didn't last nearly as long as I wanted it to. His concerned gaze slipped from my face to my bruised neck. I leaned forward to kiss him again. He smiled and pulled back. "Let's get you back to Velbam in one piece first." "Fine, bossy pants." He chuckled, scooped up my clean shirt and came back to me. He helped me ease into the blouse. Once it was on, he hugged me. I felt safe in his arms and buried my face in his chest. "You tell me if something was wrong, right?" I asked. "I don't want you to worry. I know you just woke up, but get some sleep if you can. I'll have someone bring food in case you're hungry." He strode to the door, hesitated for a second on the threshold, and after a firm nod, left. He'd said he'd never lie to me, and he wasn't technically, but something was wrong. Whatever transpired over the last 4 days had him anxious and worried. That kiss had been more than a mere kiss. There'd been an edge to it, like he feared I was going to be taken away from him. I looked out the window and saw him talking with Trollian. Whatever they were speaking about had Alred throwing his arms up and narrowing his eyes. He was pissed. Trollian had the same look on his face. I frowned, wishing I could hear what they were saying. Alred might be good at keeping his mouth shut, but Trollian wasn't. If I worked at him, I bet I could make him tell me what was going on. Alred said to rest, but I'd been out for 4 days. I should have been wide awake. However, the moment I laid down, sleepiness overtook me and I drifted off. Sometime later, the door opened and closed. I smiled, knowing who it was without even having to look. 2 boots thudded quietly to the floor, accompanied by an elvish curse. The bed sank, and an arm wrapped gently around me, pulling me in close. Alred kissed my temple and settled down behind me. I fell back asleep in seconds, lulled by the strong smell of cedar and campfire smoke. Traveling back to Velbam was much harder than the ride there. Being on horseback too long made my wound throb. After cursing vividly for a solid hour under my breath on the first day, Alred came up alongside me and we dismounted. Walking was less jarring but much slower. "You should have let me take the wagon," he scolded on our 3rd day of travel. "Why?" "It was the only one they had in the village." "I'll be fine." I grimaced when I tripped over a rock, my hand flying to my side. "I should have given you more time to recover." "I'm fine," I repeated. "It's my first battle wound. I'll deal with it." His grunt indicated that was not what he wanted to hear, but he let it go. The soldiers spread out around us, keeping us protected as we moved through the wastelands. We were about 2 days away from Velbaram's borders. I wanted to get back there and lay down on something that wasn't hard ground. The supplies for tents and cots we'd brought to the village had been destroyed in one of the explosions. This time, we were roughing it. Admittedly, falling asleep on Alred's chest the last few nights had made it more than tolerable. I enjoyed waking up to his face, sporting a look of disbelief, coupled with joy. I knew how he felt. A tiny voice kept reminding me this was all a dream. His hand slipped into mine and I smiled. The bond between us had certainly grown since we confessed our feelings for each other. He sensed more than my pain or fear now. The only downside to this journey was Trollian's obstinate silence. I'd tried on several occasions to make him spill, but he'd glance toward Alred and shake his head. He, like Alred, told me there was nothing I should worry about, which only made me worry more. The second we were safe, I'd grab them by the ears and make them talk. I blew out a breath after another long hour of walking had gone by. Despite feeling rested the day we left Ludlin, each passing minute drained me. I hadn't said as much to Alred, but from the annoyed look on his face, he could tell without my saying a damned word. "Taking a break," he announced. 10 minutes. "No, we don't need to," I argued, but he kissed me, cutting off my protests. "That's not fair." "It's not meant to be." He nodded to a flat rock and pulled me to it. Voices called out in the distance. We glanced toward the rear of our party to see 2 of the 4 scouts returning. "Sit down and rest. I'm going to check in with them," Alred said. I almost went with him, but exhaustion won out and I took a spot on the hard stone. I ended up lying across it, gazing up at the hazy, overcast sky. My side hurt less today, but it still hurt. I placed my hand on it, thankful it hadn't been worse. I must have dozed off for a few seconds when a loud crack had me jerking to my feet and cringing when the motion aggravated my injury. "What was that?" I asked. Alred returned to my side, accompanied by Trollian. "Trouble. We need to keep moving. Can you ride?" "If I need to." Trollian shouted for the soldiers to mount up. Alred led me to his horse. Once I was in the saddle, he climbed up behind me, flicked the reins and kicked the horse into a gallop. The bouncing did not help with the pain. I bit my tongue to stop from cursing. Another sharp crack, and I was straining to look behind us. Black storm clouds had formed on the horizon, moving swiftly in our direction. I wanted to ask if the storm was all Alred was worried about, but the strain on his face said there was worse headed our way. The scouts must have spotted goblins nearby. Our party raced across the wastelands, trying to outrun the storm. Lightning streaked across the sky in spiderwebs of green and violet. Alred glanced skyward, muttering in Elvish when the black clouds caught up to us way too fast for the phenomenon to be natural, as there was no wind to propel them. I started to ask him how bad it was going to get, when a bolt of lightning struck the ground near our party. The horses whinnied and bucked, scattering from the strike, forcing us to veer to the right. Several soldiers fell from their saddles. Alred tugged on the reins, turning, when a second bolt struck yards from us. We were thrown from the horse's back, then rolled across the rocky ground. Alred pulled me back on my feet, pushing me behind him. He drew his sword. Trollian and the soldiers rushed to flank him, and put a wall between me and whatever it was they were facing. I peeked over Alred's shoulder, flinching as the bolts of lightning continued striking the ground. Instead of charring the dirt and sand, a weird green shimmer remained, pulsing as if it were alive. "What is that?" I whispered, grabbing Alred's arm. He didn't answer. I followed his fierce glare to a ridge on our right. Standing atop it were 4 large figures, a banner beside them. Without a breeze, it hung limp. The figures were most definitely identifiable. Goblins. Alred unsheathed his dagger and handed it to me. "Is it a war band?" I asked, taking the blade without question. "No, this is worse." 4 more lightning strikes hit the ground, then it fell quiet, too quiet. The shimmering green sand shifted and moved, rising like something was pushing its way out of the earth. Alred said something in Elvish, but I wasn't sure what they meant. His green eyes met mine over his shoulder. "Lightning devils." "Right, lightning devils. Sounds delightful," I muttered. "Shouldn't we run?" The second after I suggested it, I took in our surroundings. Nothing but open wasteland stretched for miles in each direction. The sound of rushing water from far behind me had me standing on my toes. We were uncomfortably close to a cliff. I gulped, turning back to find the sands had shifted even more and figures were taking form. "Blow the horn," Alred whispered to Trollian. "We're too far away. No one will hear." "Someone might." I'd been told about the horns in one of my short history lessons with Jurgis. Each captain, commander, and general had one to use when they needed aid. Never had I thought I'd hear one utilized. Trollian lifted the white and silver horn to his lips and blew long and loud. The deep baritone sound echoed across the wastelands. The seconds stretched into a minute, then two. No answering call came. We were on our own. The devils morphed into humanoid figures, standing 7 feet tall. They shook their bodies free of the sand, revealing twisted and curved glass. The freaking creatures were made of glass. Their heads came to jagged points. Crowns of thorned glass. Instead of hands, their arms ended in wicked glass blades. I tried to count but lost track when they began to march together, forming a pack. Waves of lightning rolled over their bodies. When the one in front, the tallest, opened its mouth, an ear-piercing screech cut through the air. I slapped my hands to my ears. The shriek cut off, and the devils charged forward. Trollian led the first line of defense and met them head-on. He ducked under the first swipe of a devil's arm and drove his sword through its back. The devil shattered with a shriek and fell to the ground in shards of glass. The thought I had a nanosecond before 3 came for Alred and me was that at least they could be killed. Alred yelled for the soldiers to guard me and rushed forward to join the fight. I watched from between the soldiers' shoulders as Alred and Trollian fought back to back. Glass fragments littered the ground, yet more devils kept coming. On the ridge, the goblins stood and watched. I hoped they could see me glaring at them from this far away. I held the pommel of the dagger so hard it cut into my hand. One of the soldiers shouted a warning. I was shoved to the side. A devil's blade struck the ground where I'd been standing. I spun around in time to witness another one tear through one of our soldiers' armor like paper. Another soldier speared it through the back. The devil burst into pieces that clinked as they hit the ground. We retreated further from the fighting, but closer to that damned cliff. Another devil rushed us and overwhelmed a soldier. Not about to watch him die, I ran forward, screeching the whole time, and buried my dagger in its neck. It screamed, whirling around, and knocked me aside with its heavy glass arm. I gasped at the agony shooting through me, but there was no time to catch my breath. Scrambling back up, I ran into the fight again, and between the soldier and my attack, the devil shattered at our feet. The soldier gave me a nod of thanks. He yelled in warning a second later, and I spun around to find 2 more headed our way. With the dagger firmly grasped in my hand, I let out another furious shout and rushed to meet them. Together, we killed 2 more. I had a second to gloat, excited that I was useful during this fight, when pain bloomed behind my eyes. I gasped, willing the vision to go away, but it was too late. The fight faded from sight. My knees hit the ground, and the battle on the cliff waned to the background. Shouts from the elves and the devils shrieking barely reached me. Silently, I thanked the vision for being a simple one. The vision may have been simple, but it was indisputably vivid, etching itself in my mind. 2 goblins with similar features stood before a third. He was tall, but his hair stark white and his face wrinkled. The images blurred. When they cleared, the old goblin was gone, and standing in front of 2 throne-like chairs made of bones were the 2 goblins. Vaguely, I thought I recognized them. It'd have to wait until we survived this fight. The headache ebbed, the vision fading. I tightened the hold on the dagger, ready to rejoin the battle when my head was thrown back, and a second vision held me in its clutches. I stood in the mountains, looking up at the snow-covered peaks. I blinked, and I walked down the same path as the earlier vision. The dead bodies were gone. Ahead of me was the cage holding the fire demon. Flames licked the bars, the beast inside snarled and growled when I approached. "We're close, my love, so close," I heard myself say, but like before my voice sounded off. "I just need a bit more time. Then you'll be free. You and I can be together again." I pressed my hands to the bar, wincing when the magic of the gods shot through my body like a bolt of lightning. Fury stabbed my chest like a red-hot spike. I screamed my rage. I was waiting for the vision to end, when I suddenly turned and gazed into a wall covered in ice. The face looking back at me wasn't mine. I flinched. Her lips stretching into an unnaturally wide smile. "Nienna. I see you." I jerked, trying to get away, but I was trapped in the vision. Now it was a question of what was going to kill me. The monsters in here, or the lightning devils inching closer and closer to my paralyzed body.
Chapter 10. Alred. I drove my sword into the chest of yet another devil, watching it break into pieces and fall at my feet. More kept coming, and we were quickly losing ground. 4 elves were unmoving. I grabbed Trollian's arm, pulling him back further. "We can't kill them all," I yelled over the shrieks of the newest devils making ready to charge. "We don't have a choice. Where are we going to go?" I hadn't a clue and braced for another round when a soldier behind me let out a panicked roar. Nienna was on her knees, eyes glowing, the bloody dagger in her hand toppling to the ground when she lost her grip. Trollian yelled for the elves to fall back, and I sprinted to Nienna's side. I shook her shoulder, but she gave no indication she knew I was there. "Wake up, love," I said, squeezing her hand. "Come on, snap out of it." Nothing I did worked. She wasn't even blinking, and her breathing became ragged. Alred. Trollian was appraising the oncoming devils. I took up my sword and planted myself in front of Nienna. I would fight until my last breath to keep her alive. Maybe today would be our end, at least we'd be going together. I have to protect her. You should go. Find a way to get around them. Trollian barked a laugh and raised his sword. The soldiers fell into a protective half-circle, with me and Nienna behind them. Her lips moved, but the sound of the devils drowned out what she said. The glow in her eyes brightened, and her hands closed into fists. Beyond her was the cliff. Far below, the river rushed by. Our chances of making it out of this fight alive were slim at best. Glowering at the goblins perched on the ridgeline, I grunted and sheathed my sword. Trollian gave me a questioning glance until I pointed to the cliff. We were out of options, and I was not going to watch his men slaughtered. Trollian put away his blade and ordered the soldiers to the cliff. I pulled Nienna to her feet, wrapped my arms around her as we backed closer and closer to that ledge. The devils sprinted for us. I prayed Nienna would forgive me when I dove off the cliff, holding her tight. Trollian and the soldiers jumped off with me, and we plummeted into the raging river far below. The icy water chilled me to the bone. I kicked off the rocks at the bottom, driving myself and Nienna to the surface. She sputtered the second her head broke through. The vision's hold on her had shattered. I struggled to hold onto her hand. The current was strong and ripped us away from each other, driving us downriver. I spotted Trollian ahead of me. He yelled, but the roar of the river was too loud to make out what he shouted. I swam, cutting across the current to snatch Nienna's hand again. Rocks jutted up in the middle of the river, but they were too slick for us to keep a hold on. Trollian shouted again. Keeping Nienna with me, I turned. "Shit," she yelled. "Alred. I see it. Swim for the shore." The current threatened to tear us apart. No matter how hard we swam, the shore remained out of reach. The mist rising from the waterfall we were heading toward had me cursing and wrapping my arm tighter around Nienna. She yelled, and we tumbled over the falls. She slipped from my hold. The pummeling water drove me to the bottom. I tumbled head over heels, fighting to hold my breath while I struggled to find the surface again. A firm hand tugged on my shoulder, and I followed it. Gasping for air when I came up, I scanned the water for Nienna. Trollian swam beside me. I didn't see her anywhere. Nienna. The storm clouds broke, and the hazy overcast sky lent some light to the landscape. Elves popped up, helping each other get to the shore. The current here wasn't nearly as strong. None of them were Nienna. Sucking in a breath, I dove beneath the water, straining to see her, but there was no floating body in sight. I came up again, shouting for her until I was hoarse. Harsh coughing had me pushing through the water to find she had made it to the sandy shore. I fell several times in my hurry to reach her. She squeezed my hand, coughing up water. "Let's not do that again," she muttered. "Ever." I was in full agreement and hugged her, assuring myself she was alive. We had a few cuts here and there from the fight, but considering we jumped off a cliff and went over the falls, we were in decent shape. We stood and she gasped, pressing a hand to her side. "You're bleeding," I said, brow furrowing while I checked her wound. "I'll live." "How far of a walk is it back to Velbam?" "Long enough," Trollian answered for me. "We need to get moving. IOC might not be finished with us." "Wait, IOC, as in the leader of the Bloodied Fist tribe? That's who set those things on us?" She looked like she had more to say. She gave her head a little shake and kept her thoughts to herself. "Yes, though I'm not sure how it was possible. Summoning lightning devils requires magic. Dark magic, and lots of it." I exchanged a glance with Trollian over Nienna's head. "Why do you two look as if something worse is about to come after us?" I shook my head. Trollian sighed. "Time to go," he announced, and waved for the elves who'd survived to get moving. I held onto Nienna's hand. What started as a brisk walk turned into a jog. Each pounding step across the hard-packed ground made her wince, but she never once let out a pained noise or a sound of complaint. I squeezed her hand, lending her my strength as much as I could. The hot, humid air did nothing to help the situation. The sword Neldor gifted me remained slung over my back under my coat. Nienna's leather pouch containing the tome also survived the trip over the falls and hung from her hip. Losing either item today would have been a cataclysmic way to end this trip. We ran and ran. Nienna stumbled, but assured me she was okay. She was a hell of a lot tougher than I'd imagined. Afternoon gave way to evening. I waited for goblins to surround us, but none ever did. Night would be on us fast, but camping in the wilds of the wastelands, after what we'd gone through, sounded like a great way to end up dead. I had my head down, watching my feet as I dodged rocks when Trollian threw out his arm. I came to a quick stop alongside Nienna. "What is it?" I asked. "Horses, I think. You hear them." Over the pulsing of my heart in my ears and my ragged breathing, I strained to hear what he had. Horse hooves pounded across the ground, and someone yelled. I sighed in relief. "Is that Elvish?" Nienna asked. "Yes, it is." "Can you run a bit longer?" She nodded, and our diminished party headed in the direction of the shouts and hooves. 5 minutes later, a troop of soldiers on horseback appeared on the horizon. Trollian raised his arm over his head. They headed right for us. Nienna sagged into my side. I picked her up in my arms, carrying her the rest of the way to the soldiers. "Commander Callie," I said when we reached the others, "I've never been so happy to see you in my life." She dismounted quickly. "One of our scouts heard the horn and saw the storm. We thought you were all dead." "Not dead. Not yet," Nienna added weakly. "Went over a waterfall, though." "Sounds like quite the tale. Come, let's get you back to Velbam. This is all there is." I gave her a solemn nod. "Lightning devils." Callie let out a stream of curses in Elvish. "They'll pay dearly for this." "Yes, they will." The remainder of the journey to Velbam was spent maintaining one arm wrapped securely around Nienna to keep her in the saddle. She passed out a few minutes into the ride. I let her sleep until we reached the borders of home. Jurgis and the 7 rushed out to greet us, demanding to know what happened. It was a long story, and I wasn't in the mood to tell it, not yet. I told Jurgis to take care of Nienna's wounds. Mine were minor, and I could deal with them alone. He led her away. I waited until she was out of sight and sank to the ground. "Alred," Thalia said, alarmed. "Are you injured?" "No, but we have a problem." "A massive problem," I muttered, running a hand down my weary face. "Whatever it is, it can wait until you've had a chance to rest." "No, it can't." All I wanted to do was follow Nienna and fall into bed with her tucked safely in my arms, but the weight of Neldor's sword on my back was an all-too-real reminder of who I'd met and what they'd said. I shrugged out of my jacket and pulled the sword still sheathed over my shoulder. Thalia's eyes narrowed. My brow rose in surprise. "You recognize it?" "It can't be," she whispered. "Neldor's sword." "Like I said, we have a lot to talk about." She took the blade. I grumbled, hoisting myself back to my feet. I need a drink. Then you and I need to speak with the 7 and whatever generals and commanders are here. Everything is about to change. Everything. An hour later, several sets of eyes watched me in varying states of shock, disbelief, worry, fear, and anger. I told the 7, Callie, Trollian, and the military leaders who'd been around to hear the gods' message for me. My eyelids struggled to stay open, but there'd be no sleeping for me, probably not for a long while. Just when Nienna and I had finally stopped trying to run from the way we felt about each other, the gods had to come along and dump this shit in my lap. I glanced at Trollian. This was his second time hearing the news. He had the same worried frown on his face he'd worn the first time he heard of it. I curled my hands around the edge of the table. The tight rein on my anger was slipping. I had to get out of this room and beat the hell out of something. Anything. Unfortunately, that wasn't going to happen anytime soon, because I had to take care of this matter. Reciting it all over again solidified my fear that Nienna's life was in far more danger than I ever imagined possible. I was only an elf. How the hell was I supposed to keep her alive? Madras started the war. This changes so much. Thalia rested her fingers on the sheathed blade of Neldor. Have you told Nienna all of this? No, I snapped. And no one else is going to tell her either. Not until I have a plan to save her. Trollian cleared his throat. Alred. I tossed my hand in the air, stopping him. I don't want to hear it. She's been through enough, and if she learns a goddess is after her, no sane person would be able to handle that. I'll figure something out. You freaking liar. I hung my head at the sound of Nienna's furious voice. Reluctantly, I turned to find her in the doorway of the war room, with Jurgis right beside her. He wore an apologetic grimace, but it didn't matter now. Nienna glared at me as she stomped into the room. This is what you were hiding from me. I was going to tell you. You lied to me, she shouted. No, I didn't. She rolled her eyes, her rage bombarding me through her bond. Not telling me that someone else is trying to kill me is worse than lying. Shit, Alred, were you ever going to tell me? Or were you going to wait for Madras to show up? That'd be a great conversation to have while she's trying to kill me. We're not sure she wants to kill you, I said. The gods only said you're part of her plans. She scoffed. Yeah, that makes me feel so much better. The fire demon in my visions, what I've been seeing, it all has to do with her. Is that what the gods told you? Yes, I replied, not about to hold anything back now. There was no point. Is that why my visions are so bad? It's possible. She rubbed her hands down her face, then through her hair. All I wanted was to go to her, but the fury in those green eyes kept me rooted to the spot. She clenched her hands into fists at her side. Are they going to get worse? I don't know. The gods weren't completely forthcoming with answers. She turned to Jurgis, held out her hands, and he gave her the tome. I came here to share the vision I had before we plunged off a cliff. She slammed the tome on the table, flipped to the latest entry. IOC of the Bloodied Fist clan has been replaced by his sons. Thought you'd want to know. I took the tome, reading over the words hastily written in her slanted handwriting. That's what you saw. For the most part, yeah. I reached for her. She backed away. Don't do this. Do what? She snapped. I didn't see how they took power, but I'm going to guess it wasn't from my dear father stepping down. Do what you want with it. I'm taking a walk. Don't follow me, she added, pointing a finger at my face. She marched out of the war room. I scratched at my beard, watching her go. Alred, Trollian said from across the large table. What? Don't be an idiot, Thalia answered instead. Go after her, now. We need to make a plan, I argued. Thalia stormed to my side, took my arm and dragged me to the door. Out now. You can join us when you're sure she's not going to try to murder you in your sleep." She was right. I ran out of the war room. Finding Nienna wasn't hard. All I had to do was follow the pulsing anger coursing through the bond we shared. She stood in the gardens, beneath what was quickly becoming her willow tree. It's where she always ended up. One of these days, I'd tell her Garrick Howe had gravitated to the same tree. But not tonight. The gardens were lit with braziers and torches. The moons were covered by heavy, thick clouds. I stopped a foot away. Her shoulders tensed. "I'm sorry." "For which part?" "You were healing from a serious injury. The last thing I wanted to do was tell you I met with the gods in the woods. It doesn't even sound like it's real." "But it is, and you had a conversation with them that involved me," she shot back, whirling around, sending her hair flying wildly about her head. "All this time I told you there was something wrong with me, and it looks like I was right. It's not your fault Madras is using you." "You sure about that?" "How do we know, huh? How do we know I'm not going to be the one to make this entire situation worse?" She backed away when I moved toward her. Her gaze took on a frenzied look and she hugged herself. "I'm going to be the reason he gets out. I know it. I'm having the visions, for a reason, and they're going to get worse." "We don't know that. All they said is that the visions were caused by Madras actions." She laughed bitterly, backing away until she hit the tree. "You don't get it." "Get what?" I asked, exasperated. "What they told me changes everything, yes, but if we can get word to the goblins, we can end the war peacefully. Then we can put our attention on tracking down Madras. On stopping her. I won't let her get to you. I'm here to protect you, and that is what I'll do." "You can't." I made to draw her into my arms, but she pushed off the tree, staggering to get away from me. "What are you talking about?" I knew this would happen, that it was a bad idea. I knew it, and I let it happen anyway. "Will you please tell me what the hell you're talking about?" She turned her back to me again, her shoulders hunched like she was trying to curl in on herself and vanish. "I heard it all," she murmured. "I heard you tell them everything about Madras and Nasir." I grunted a curse. "I was going to tell you." "That's not why I'm mad," she yelled, whipping around. "Then why? What did I do?" "You didn't do anything. It's me. It was always going to be me who messed this up." She backed away. I was tired of her running from me. I rushed forward and caught her in my arms. She shouted, shoving at my chest, but I held on, hugging her, until finally the fight went out of her and she slumped. We fell to our knees in the grass, her hands fisted in my shirt while she clung to me. She raised her head, my heart aching to see tears slipping down her cheeks. "Talk to me, please. What is this really about?" She sucked in a shaky breath, her mouth opening and closing a few times until the words came out. I saw the cage. I saw it like I was standing in front of it. "That doesn't mean anything." "Yeah, it does." She buried her face against my chest, muttering, "I think I'm the one who will let Nasir out. I'm going to be the reason Kenzugrot is destroyed. It's going to be all my fault. And you're going to lose me. We won't be able to stop her." I buried my hand in her hair, doing my best to calm her while her words rampaged through my mind. She had a vision after she was stabbed. What else had she seen already? I wanted to believe I'd be enough to keep her safe, but we were going up against forces far beyond my capabilities. "We should stop this," she whispered. "I'm going to pretend you didn't say that. It's only going to end with you hurt and me dead." I cupped her face, forcing her to look at me. "You listen to me, Nienna Havard. I don't give a damn what the gods said, or what you see in your visions. You and I found each other somehow in this crazy, mad world of ours, and I am not about to let this go. I'm not about to stop loving you, not for 1 second. Don't you dare give up. The second you do that, the enemy wins." Tears fell down her cheeks, and I swiped them away with my thumb. "She's a goddess. The fire demon's a god. How are we supposed to fight that? With help. You're not alone. You have me and everyone here. We'll make it through. Her lips twitched, a sad smile slowly spread across her face. A few weeks ago, I was a librarian. I'm not a warrior like you. I'm not strong enough to survive. Yes, you are. I hugged her as tight as I could. Her arms slipped around my back. The last thing I wanted her to feel was my fear. I willed her to only sense how much I cared for her. We'll figure this out together. You'll see. Everything's going to be fine. She sniffed hard, holding me tightly. You're a terrible liar. I glanced skyward, praying to the gods who were dying that somehow I would find a way to save Nienna. After all these years, I'd discovered the same love and happiness as Garrick. Losing her now would be the death of me. I kissed her on the top of her head, whispering to her in Elvish to soothe her fears. Sensing her exhaustion, I stood, gently cradling her against my chest. I carried her to her room and laid her in bed. I tucked her in and rose to leave, but she clutched my hand, dragging me back. I slipped out of my coat, my shirt, boots, and climbed in beside her. She curled into my chest, and I bundled her in my arms, letting sleep claim us both. Chapter 11. Alred. Nienna stretched out beside me, sleeping soundly. I ran my fingers through her hair, admiring the various undertones of flaxen, gold, and red in the morning sunlight. She smiled, snuggling closer, her cheek against my chest. I slipped out the bed. Once she was tucked back in and dragging my pillow closer, I walked to the windows. Morning fog lay over the gardens with no breeze in sight to chase it away. The suns barely broke the horizon, and I ran my hands up my arms, chasing away the chill. The last few days since our return had been long and filled with more shouting, crying, and ended with Nienna stomping on my foot, warning me if I ever kept anything from her again, she'd kick my ass. She hadn't been the only one upset. She finally told me what else she saw back in Lublin, about Garrick's message. I admitted the last page of his tome had been lost. She'd thrown a few things, cursing her dead father about not telling her what was on it. How we were supposed to break Nienna's connection to a gift bestowed by the gods was beyond me. Then again, so was about everything else we had to deal with now. Our conversation had ended in another argument where she proceeded to tell me yet one more time that we should put our relationship on hold. I'd swept her into my arms, kissing her fiercely, telling her without words she wasn't getting rid of me that easily. In the late hours of the night, I'd been able to hold on to hope that somehow we'd make it out of this mess alive. In the early light of day, however, that hope was burned away by the harsh reality that I had no idea how to keep her safe. I wasn't even sure where to start. The gods said we couldn't fight Madras and Nasir alone, which meant finding a way to end the war with the goblins. It had never happened, not in time at least. We'd gone too many years without peace. How was I supposed to magically make an alliance with our oldest enemy? Behind me, the blankets rustled. Nienna sat up, stretching her arms over her head. She smiled when her gaze landed on me. What are you doing up already? Watching the sunrise. Watch it tomorrow. She lifted the blankets. Come back to bed for a while longer. I'm not ready to get up yet. I grunted, more than happy to accept the offer when a horn blew outside, followed by a second shorter blast. What the hell? What is it? Nienna asked, climbing out of bed to join me at the window. I'm not sure. I held her close, peering through the fog as guards rushed from their posts to the gate. Right behind them were the 7, some of them still in robes like they were pulled out of bed. The gates to the gardens were opened, and an entire troop of soldiers marched through. They weren't alone. Those are goblins, Nienna said, confused. I nodded, stunned at the sight of the goblin banners flying alongside a white flag, making their way to the gardens. Goblins carried them, and at the very end of the entourage were 2 of their number I didn't expect to see so soon. Brink and Bracken, I whispered. They're here under a banner of peace. Iose's sons. Are you sure? I am. We exchanged a glance, broke apart, and rushed to get dressed so we could join the others in the gardens. Once we were there, we found the seven speaking quietly with the twins, their faces wary. I held out my arm to stop Nienna from getting too close, and approached them alone. "What trick is this?" I demanded. "No trick," Brink stated, his rough voice sounding sincere. "IOC is dead." "You killed him," I said, knowing because of what Nienna had seen. "We did because of what he's done to the tribes," Bracken said. "The gods our people have for so long ignored came to my brother and me. They spoke to us of what is to come, and what our ancestors did. There is much we must atone for, and much we need to make right. It's why we're here, Protector. It's why we brought you this." He held out a piece of parchment. "What is this?" I asked, taking it. "The final page in Garrick Havard's tome. IOC stole it the night he was killed," Bracken said. "If it's true, I'm afraid we are too late." "Did he say Garrick?" Nienna was at my side a second later. I scowled at her. She poked me in the side. "Open it." I unfolded the parchment and read the last words Garrick had written. There were only a few short lines of text, nothing like what I'd seen him write before. This wasn't a detailed description of a vision. This was a warning. The second Nienna read the words, she faltered, falling against my side. The page fell to the ground. I glared at the words. "The cage will break. The gods are dead. The connection must be sundered. Destroy it. Destroy it all. He is coming, and she will fall. Fire will consume us all." "Me," Nienna whispered. "He means me. We don't know for sure." I wrapped her in my arms, confused by the looks of sympathy on Brink and Bracken's faces. There was no malice or promise of violence there. "Thalia, let them in. It would appear we have much to discuss." That said, and with Nienna tucked safely against my side, we turned and led the way into Central Tower. Today was certainly a day for surprises. I swallowed back my anxiety at what else we were about to learn. Whatever it cost me, I would ensure those words didn't come true. Nienna would live. Whatever the cost.
Thank you for listening. This has been a Ciara Graves book. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified of new releases.